right, good morning, everyone. I am going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. You can all hear me, I'm assuming. Okay, we're all here. Okay, great, thanks. Laura Lee, if you'd please call the roll.
Paul Banks.
Paul Banks here.
Stu Boyd.
Stu Boyd here.
Pam Howard.
Pam Howard here.
Lori Vista Ward.
Lori Vista Ward here.
Don Kirk.
Don Kirk here.
Barbara Cruz.
Barbara Cruz here.
Mark Setter.
Mark Setter here.
Thank you. And I believe we have the Pledge of Allegiance. Matt has a flag for us. So as soon as we get that flag up, Mark Setter, if you would lead us in the pledge, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The first item on today's agenda is the adoption of the agenda for the special meeting, excuse me, this morning as presented. I will entertain a motion and a second to adopt the agenda.
So moved, Don Kirk.
Paul Banks, second.
Thank you. I have a motion from Don Kirk and a second from Paul Banks to adopt the agenda as presented. Are there any changes or corrections, questions? Mark Setter?
I just had a question. Typically, during the opening, we read the mission statement. And is that being omitted from the agenda today because it's a special meeting, or?
I think it was probably just overlooked for the special meeting, but we can sure read it. Pam, if you have, do you have it, Pam, to read? You're muted, dear. There we go.
Is that better?
Yep, you're
Okay,
muted.
Sorry about that. The Thompson School District will be a district that empowers, challenges, and inspires students, faculty, staff, parents, school leaders, and community members to learn, achieve, and excel.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark. Okay, I have a motion and a second on the floor to adopt the agenda. Anything further? Hearing nothing, Laura Lee, please call the roll.
Paul Banks.
Paul Banks, aye.
Stu Boyd.
Stu Boyd, aye.
Pam Howard.
Pam Howard, aye.
Lori Vista Ward.
Lori Vista Ward, aye.
Don Kirk.
Don Kirk, aye.
Barbara Cruz.
Barbara Cruz, aye.
Mark Setter.
Mark Setter, aye.
All right, thank you. And the agenda is unanimously adopted. The next thing we have up is public comment. And because we're going to take, we're going to take action on the calendar, we did allow public comment at the special meeting. Laura Lee, I believe you have how many?
There were 4 of them. One will be read.
One will be read. Okay. Okay, so we received 4 calls. One will be read here public. The others, I believe all the rest of you got the others, or did I just get those? You all got those. Okay, so we did all see those. And the reason they're not being played publicly is because they didn't follow the instructions and they didn't have contact information. So they were basically anonymous calls. So we can't use them in the public meeting. And since we didn't have names or phone numbers with them, we couldn't call the folks back either to get that information. So if you are listening out there and you want to call in for public comment, please make sure that you leave your name and contact information and address so that we can read your comment. But the board did see or did hear those comments. We did get those. So we're going to go ahead and play the ones that we have now. Laura Lee or Matt or whoever's going to do that.
All right, I will play the one that we do have.
Thank you. Everybody make sure you mute yourselves.
And let me know in the chat box if you don't hear it properly, but here we go.
Yes, my name is Travis Lease. Address is 4550 Ridgeway Drive, Loveland. had some comments and concerns about the high school schedule. Not quite sure if having my son go to 2 classes in the morning, then having to come pick him up, do 2 virtual classes, and then have to pick him up again to drive him back for athletics. I don't know if myself or any other parent can get off twice.
Hang on. All right, sorry, it cut off there. I'm going to have to restart it. Just a moment.
Okay, no problem.
Yes, my name is Travis Lease. Address is 4550 Ridgeway Drive, Loveland. Had some comments and concerns about the high school schedule. Not quite sure if having my son go to 2 classes in the morning, then having to come pick him up, do 2 virtual classes, and then have to pick him up again to drive him back for athletics. I don't know if myself or any other parent can get off twice from work in that day. We're concerned about that. I certainly think they need to have in-person instruction. We were wondering if anyone had considered the schedule where they would go full days, Monday, Wednesday, Friday 1 week, Tuesday, Thursday the following week, if they were in one group, or second group being Tuesday, Thursday, week 1 with Monday, Wednesday, Friday the second week. But again, athletes having to be at school anyway for practice really need to have a different consideration. Because again, not only myself, but also my employees having to come get kids twice a day just puts an undue burden on parents. And we just know that the online learning is not the same as in-person instruction. My phone number is 772-370-3570. If any other questions, thank you.
And that is the end of public comment.
Thank you, Matt. That was the only public comment call that we received that we could play today. Next on the agenda is the discussion action item 4.1, which is the revision to the school year calendar for 2020-2021, which is the purpose of the special meeting portion of today's meeting. So I will defer to Dr. Schaefer.
So good morning, Madam President, members of the Board of Education. For your consideration this morning, we, staff district is proposing a school calendar change for the launch of the school year. This would require, we would be proposing a 2-week delayed start for the start of the school, and then in the 3rd week, a transition period for students to return to school. So I have asked staff to present to you. So Bill Siebers will be leading the discussion on the why behind this, and then we want to entertain certainly any types of questions that the board might have. This is, we recognize, a first read. Given the urgency of time and the need for us to plan, we would respectfully request action if the board wants to move in that direction today, this morning, so that we can plan accordingly. So I'll turn this over to Dr. Bill Siebers now for his presentation.
Madam President, School Board, Dr. Schaefer, Bill Siebers, Chief Human Resources Officer. Also, Don Huckabee is part of this presentation as well. The first thing I want to talk to you about is the proposed change for the 2 weeks. So everything would stay the same, except forwarding it for 2 weeks. So the transitional day for kindergarten students in 6th grade and 9th grade would still occur on that first day, which would be August 31st. And then all students coming back on 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. And a proposal too is a shortened week for that first week back. Up until this point, I think it's important to understand that before we move this item forward to the board, we had talked to APT Meet and Confer to see if there's support with this proposal. So we had talked to APT Meet and Confer. We had a conversation with Classified Meet and Confer. We have support from the Teachers Association, and the big committee is the calendar committee. So we had a meeting to discuss this and got support from calendar committee. And there's different representatives on calendar committee, and we have a parent representative and community members on that committee. So they're in support as well. So the purpose of it currently right now, there's 2 training days on August 6th and 7th, which is the Thursday and Friday for staff coming back. And then there's the furlough days that are replaced with training days, additional training days through CARES Act dollars, which is August 10th and 11th. And then there's 3 days after that where there's building time and there's teacher time and there's district time within those 3 days. Postponing the school for 2 weeks would provide time for staff when they come back to get ready for kids physically coming back to school. So everything that has to take place as far as the recommendations from Todd Piccone and the restart plan and from the county, there are things in schools that need to take place prior to it. You know, the biggest example is classroom sizes. There's a certain number for classroom sizes. So principals and staff need to come together and collaborate to kind of rearrange what schools look like. What schools look like prior cannot be the way schools look like now, as far as traffic areas, you know, within the school, and having time with staff to get kids ready is the major concern that we have. And that's why we're putting this proposal forward for the board to consider. At this time, I'd like to turn over to Dawn Huckabee to add anything to the conversation.
Thanks, Bill. Dawn Huckabee, Chief Academic Officer for Thompson School District. Madam President, members of the board, thank you for considering this proposal. What I want to share is that, as you see under board policy IC/ICA, there are requirements for instructional hours. And we've been in conversation with the Colorado Department of Education on our plan, because we are, by doing this, we would be a few hours short at the high school level. And what we've been, the communication we've had with the Colorado Department of Education is that in order to get our students in school and have this in-person time, that we are doing our best good faith effort to make sure that we've got quality instruction happening and that we are meeting the needs of students. The reason we are short at the high school level with these two weeks is that we will need to extend the lunch period a bit to, you know, from a typical 30-minute lunch to a 45-minute lunch to allow our students to be able to do the proposed schedule that we've shared or is in our draft plan, for them to have in person in the morning and then go to remote learning in the afternoon. So it's due to an extended lunch, and the Department of Education has provided us assurance that, you know, that this, even though we'll be short on time a little bit because of that extra 15 minutes, that they would be supportive of us as far as a waiver goes, should we need to actually pursue a waiver.
Don, on that short time, I'm looking at the minimum hours and then the maybe reduced to hours. Are we going to be short on those maybe reduced hours as well? Are we going to be short the 10:56?
We are just under that, like
okay.
Just under.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Questions for either Dr. Siebers or Don? Paul?
So this is bird walking a little bit, but looking beyond this, anticipating cohorts of students, entire schools going offline and so forth, has CD laid out any thoughts of how they're going to be flexible and how they're going to handle that going forward?
Thanks, Paul. You will receive, actually, IC/ICA is a policy that we need to revise, and we'll be bringing that revision back to you on August 5th. It just needs to be revised before students start. One of the things that is the flexibility is will be some language around what does it mean when we say remote learning, and that we can count remote learning in our instructional time minutes. So, because right now the current policy does not have any reference to remote time. So that's one change that will happen, and that's the flexibility that will be afforded to us from CDE, is by putting into policy having that remote learning time that while it doesn't have to be a minute for minute, it will be referenced such that they are activities that are directed by teaching staff, and that learning will count.
Can I birdwalk
Yeah,
a little bit more?
Yeah, go ahead.
So let's say there's a situation where a cohort of students or an entire school is recommended that they quarantine or shut down for 3 days. Are those the type of situations where we are going to try to automatically provide 3 days of online, or is it just, we're going to wait the 3 days out and pick up where we left off in person, or are we going to be trying to go back and forth, or how might that work? And
Our intention is to have staff and students ready to go online at a moment's notice. So it will be exactly that. So if we know that they're going to be a cohort or a school is going to be out for 3 days, then they are prepared to go to that remote classroom with their cohort in a remote classroom for 3 days or 2 weeks or whatever the length of time it is. But they would be staying within their classroom and not going to the 100% online version of instruction. Hopefully that helps clarify.
Yep, so there won't be any loss of instructional time even with short-term shutdowns. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Dr. Schaefer.
Yep, and just to extend on Dawn's answer, this school year, we need to be prepared to be able to toggle back and forth between in-person and virtual without interruption to instruction. And so having this seamless, uninterrupted transition where students may be meeting in person and then literally the next day would have to go virtual. Our plan would be to create no interruption in instruction. And so allowing teachers and staff that opportunity to plan for that. And then, quite honestly, we are very optimistic, hopeful that we will be able to launch the school year in person, providing that, for lack of a better word, professional development for our students as well, to prepare them for kind of a dual reality of not only in-person instruction, but online is something that we'll be aiming to do at the very start of the school year. We don't have that crystal ball, but there's probably a good probability that at some point during the year we'll need to shift to virtual and then hopefully shift back to online, into in person. And so it's creating that seamless transition back and forth.
And if these questions need to be bumped to our later conversation, just say we'll talk about that later. I'm just thinking about instructional time too. So what about the situation where maybe it's the teacher that also gets caught up in the outbreak and all of a sudden they're not able to perform their duties, and then we have substitutes trying to pick up an online situate? Any thoughts around that and how we not lose time there?
That definitely is, in part, the intent is to not lose instructional time. So we will also be training our substitutes on how to use our district learning management system and platforms so that they too can be seamless. We're working through the process and the protocols of how we would do that to get a teacher, a substitute, the information from the teacher of how to get into that teacher's classroom. When I say classroom, the virtual classroom. So yes, we're absolutely looking at how do we do that. Bill, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think the other important thing too, it's case by case and school by school, because some schools are a little different and they have additional staffing there. Let's say you have an instructional coach at the elementary level, an instructional coach or an interventionist could take over that class as well without, having a skilled teacher in front of them that understands the curriculum within the building is extremely helpful too. So it'd be a little different at the middle school too and the high school. As far as high school, more content related, and having a qualified substitute teacher in there that has a background in that content is really what in HR we want to focus on.
Thanks, Bill. Barb, you have a question or comment?
Well, it's a comment in the fact that all of these questions are exactly why we need to have that delayed start so that we have time to build these pieces into the comfort level of our teachers and parents, substitutes. So I really, I'm in support of this whole process of keeping us focused on what our agenda item is so that we can move forward.
Thanks, Barb. Stu?
I have a question, Dawn and Mark, about the policy. Sentence 2 says, I'm talking about IC/ICA. Prior to the end of the year, the board shall determine the length of time during which district schools shall be in session during the next school year. The policy reads to me as if the end of the year means the end of the school year, and we're beyond the end of the school year. So I wonder, do we need to make some kind of an adjustment or pass something that allows us to do that?
Actually, Bill is more the person on that side of it. Bill, do you want to talk about what emergency contingencies we have with this?
Yeah, Stu, I'm trying to look exactly what you're looking at as far as the board policy with that, because that's something we'd have to consider as well. If there are changes to that policy that Dawn is moving forward, we'd have to look at our wording around that.
Bill, what I'm actually referring to is, if you're looking at the policy, look at the second sentence, prior to the end of the year. And based on other wording in the policy, that sounds like it's the end of the school year. And we're beyond that. And so I just wondered if we needed to make some kind of an adjustment to allow us to do this.
Well, it's so there's two things as I look at that wording in your question and to have a better understanding of it is, typically we adopt the calendar by November as board policy by November for the following year, right? So, that's in place. We adopted the calendar in January for the next 2 years. This right here falls into other circumstances. And as far as giving notice, we can make changes for unforeseen circumstances without giving the 30-day notice. So this is what the board can do, make an amendment to the calendar and be in compliance with policy.
Okay, thanks, Bill.
All right, if there's nothing further, I'm going to go ahead and ask for a motion. This is an action item, discussion action item, so we're fine. I'm going to go ahead and ask for a motion to approve the calendar changes for the school year 2020-2021. Dawn, you're going to make the motion?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. I have a motion. I have a motion from Don Kirk and a second from Pam Howard. Thank you. So I have a motion from Don Kirk and a second from Pam Howard to go ahead and adopt the 2020-2021 school calendar changes as presented. Is there any further discussion? Stu and then Mark Setter.
Since the information went out to the public about this, I've had contacts from 3 educators and from a student. And let me just really quickly talk about, and I'll be very quick in terms of talking about these different forms of communication. A teacher and a counselor both are very much in favor of this. The counselor talked about the need to redo the block schedule, or to create a block schedule at the high schools, which is not currently in place. I also heard from an elementary teacher who felt that it was vital that they have the extra time to work on this. I received a letter yesterday, which I forwarded to Dr. Schaefer, from a Berthoud High School student. She'll be a senior next year, and she urged me to vote against the delay. Also urged me to vote against the partial day start of school. And the essence of what she said was that she felt that she lost so much education last year that she'd be losing the first couple of weeks this year. She's very concerned about that. And regarding the half day at the beginning, the essence of what she said was that we're underestimating kids if we think that they can't jump immediately into the new schedule. And the reason I wanted to bring her concerns to light is I hadn't heard anything from a student, and I actually hadn't heard anything from someone who was opposed to the delay. And I thought this was a unique and an important perspective to share with you.
Thanks, Stu. Mark Setter.
Yeah, thanks. So just one question and a statement. First question, more of a clarification than anything. Kind of a Cliff Notes version of this is we're talking about starting the school year 2 weeks later, and then we're ending it at the same date we would otherwise. So basically, we're shortening the school year with a 2-week delay. Would that be a good summary?
Correct. So everything stays the same as far as what's built in the calendar. It's just extending that start.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I'd thank Stu for sharing his thoughts. Dr. Banks, thank you for your questions. I really appreciated those as well. I also have gotten quite a bit of feedback. Most of it was positive. Most of it was in support of this. There were a couple of objections, and bottom line for me, this is a very complicated issue. It is a sacrifice, but we are living in a pandemic situation, and so it's a difficult time as well.
Thanks, Mark. I would just like to add that during this time, although students won't be in class for those 2 weeks, it's my understanding that teachers and staff will be doing their work. They'll be training, they'll be preparing. So it's not that those 2 weeks are just 2 weeks more vacation for employees. It's 2 weeks of them preparing to get ready so that they can be more comfortable jumping from in-person to virtual. Stu, you mentioned the students said that we're underestimating students, and students who are digital natives and came up in, how to do all this stuff online and how to do everything with technology. Maybe teachers not so much. They're used to teaching a certain way in the classroom, and so I think we need to make sure that they are able to do that seamless transfer. And I think that giving them 2 extra weeks will be helpful. Mark Setter.
Yeah, thanks for that comment, because it reminded me of a question that I wanted to ask. If Todd Piccone is available, one question that I had was how many of our school buildings have been available over the summer for people to get in, for example, teachers that need to set up their classroom, new teachers that might be moving from one classroom to another, as well as any, janitorial staff. What's the access to the buildings been? I know that under the bond schedule, about half our schools were going to get new roofs over the summer. And of course, it's not a good idea to have people inside the building while you're working on those roofs. So I was wondering if we could have somebody weigh in on that.
Yeah, Mark, thanks. Great question. I will say that is a piece of it. So we've had about 20 schools that have been more or less shut down over the summer. The access to those buildings still is not available. So when you look at the large renovations, as in Loveland High, Thompson Valley, the roofing is still going on, the Berthoud and Ivy additions, those schools staff hasn't even been able to hardly walk into. So, I would say there's right at about 20 schools that have been shut down over the summer that has not allowed staff to go in and analyze the school. I will say custodial has been in, but, we need building leadership and teachers in the schools to actually plan out what the classrooms are going to look like. So to this point, it's been pretty minimal staff in a large chunk of the buildings that are closed due to construction.
Thanks, Todd. Anything further before I call for the vote? Okay, Laura Lee, if you would please call the roll.
Paul Banks.
Paul Banks, aye.
Stu Boyd.
Stu Boyd, aye.
Pam Howard.
Pam Howard, aye.
Lori Vista Ward.
Lori Vista Ward, aye.
Don Kirk.
Don Kirk, aye.
Barbara Cruz.
Barbara Cruz, aye.
Mark Setter.
Mark Setter, aye.
All right, thank you. And that passes unanimously. That's our only our only action item for the special meeting. So that concludes the special meeting portion of the meeting. And we'll move on to the study session. I think I'm going to suggest, you guys can tell me if you want to do it differently, but I'm going to suggest we move right into the fall launch discussion, then take a little break before the second part, or possibly even during the fall launch, depending on how long that goes on. But I'm suggesting about another hour before we take a break. Is everybody okay with that? Great. All right. So for study session, item 5.1 is the fall launch 2020-2021 school year discussion. Dr. Schaefer, you want to start us off?
Yep, I'll just do a brief set. So this morning, we are pleased to bring you our collective efforts on what the fall launch, what we're anticipating and what we are proposing for the start of this upcoming school year. And as staff will share, this has been a Herculean task, a hugely collaborative effort made up of feedback from our community, where we had surveys on the front end, feedback from our employee groups, and then just a lot of planning that has involved staff and leadership as we've been able to plan for the upcoming school year. A lot of the data and reliance for our decision making and direction, we've worked in almost in lockstep with our Larimer County Board of Health. We've just received updated guidance from Colorado Department of Education, make sure that that's in alignment. We've relied on data and research from the CDC, as well as from the National Pediatric Association. So there's a lot of effort and time that have gone into this plan. And the challenge, as you'll hear, is that we talk about things changing daily in terms of the guidance and the information. Sometimes it changes 2 or 3 times daily. And so our best hope is that as we move into this upcoming school year, we will be utilizing the most up-to-date and reliable information. Health and safety is really what's going to be our overarching theme here. Obviously, school districts exist to educate our students and prepare them for the future, but even more important than that, quite honestly, is the health and safety of each of our students as well as our staff. And so with that preamble, I'd like to turn this over to Todd Piccone and Dawn Huckabee, who will walk you through just an overview of the plan. We'd ask that we provide first a high-level overview, and then the board can provide feedback, input, and ask questions.
Thanks. And before they start, just to reiterate what Dr. Schaefer said, we will do the overview first, and then we'll go through the plan sort of section by section and make sure everybody asks their questions on each section of the plan, and then move on, because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions. So Dawn and Todd.
Thanks. So when we think about the instructional part of school, health and safety is, we're going to have to change some things based on that. But from an academic standpoint, what we are proposing is that families have the opportunity to either choose a fully in-person opportunity with a little bit of a caveat around that at the high school, and then having a fully online, because in the survey that we did in May, we knew that about 10% of our families, at least those that responded to that survey, that about 10% were very interested in an online opportunity. So with this plan and what you have just approved from the shortened delaying the start of the school year, is that we would start our school year in person with shortened days. And as Dr. Siebers mentioned, in part it's to bring students back safely so that we can teach them the procedures, the protocols that are going to be needed for in person. It also allows us time in that shortened day to really assess where students are in a shortened day around really bringing back some of the, helping them and assisting them in re-entering school, because school is different for them. And so, there's a social emotional learning component to bringing them back part-time in that first week rather than full-time as well. And to note from what Stu mentioned that the students' concern was at the high school level, we'll kick into more of the full day with some remote learning in that afternoon. But we still need to make sure that we have our staff have opportunities after each of those days to refine what they learned, because what we think is going to work and you plan out, when you get students there, it looks a little bit different. And so, they're going to need to be able to, the transition day, the first day with kindergarten, 6th grade and 9th grade will tell our schools a lot when they only have one grade level in their schools each time. And then when we have that second day and we're going to have now all students in the school, again, what traffic patterns, what we thought was going to work, they're going to need to make those revisions. So that's the other rationale for having that slower start that first week, is really to help us build relationships, help us teach students the protocols for in-person, and then also what is going to be expected when we need to do that quick transition to online. Students would be returning in person with safety protocols in place that Todd will give a high level of. One of the big things here with in-person is that we need to maintain cohorts, and that's part of the health and safety. At the elementary level, the cohort will be that classroom, so that individual classroom that a student is assigned to. And then we'll be limiting the number of other adults that would be entering that classroom. And so we'll be looking at having specials rotate into the classroom, limiting to the degree that we can the times that students are pulled out for special services. But we'll be looking at that. At the middle school, we're looking at cohorts being where a group of students shares common teachers. So for example, having a group of, let's say, 75 to 90 students who all have the same language arts, science, and social studies teachers. So they're moving from classroom to classroom in those groups of 25 to the 25 to 30 students to each of those teachers, and not mixing to go to a different language arts teacher or a different science teacher. Mathematics, they would be going to the mathematics class that is appropriate to them, because we do have students who accelerate there. And we're working on how do we integrate our elective courses into those cohorts as well. At the high school, definitely with an 8-period day, as we previously had, that there's no way to cohort that in any way, shape, or form. Students are mixing. It's at high schools. Students aren't assigned classes necessarily based on their grade level. They're mixed. So you would often see 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th graders in a class, or you might see 9th and 10th graders together. So in order for us to minimize the contacts so that we can contact trace more easily, to that we are proposing what's called a 4x4 schedule, meaning that students will take 4 classes in the fall term. And in that fall term, they would receive the same instruction that they would typically have for the course of the full year in those 4 classes. So they will earn 4 credits, and then they will go to 4 different classes in the spring. And within that, then we have now built a schedule that minimizes how frequently they transition even from one class to another during the day. Because again, moving students in our comprehensive high schools is, and not have them mix beyond their class, is extremely difficult. So what we are proposing is that students would attend classes in the morning, and they would attend 2 of their 4 classes in the morning, and then with that extended lunch that I described earlier in the meeting, would then go home and then have remote sessions with their classroom teachers. So teachers would be meeting with the students for the 2 classes that didn't meet in person that day. And then that would just rotate day by day. So, thinking about Thompson colors, most schools will probably go with their school color days. Monday is a blue day, meaning I'm going to go to my first and second period class in person, and on a blue day, I go home and then I meet with my 3rd and 4th period class remotely. And then on a white day would be that I go to my 3rd and 4th period class in school in person, and then I go home and I meet with my teacher remotely for 1st and 2nd period. So that's kind of what, what we're proposing. This works well with Thompson Career Campus because students who are participating at Thompson Career Campus that was already going to be a 2-period block. And so students will attend Thompson Career Campus on whatever their 2-period block day would have been in person, and then they go home and then do their remote for what they would, for their classes that are on their non-Thompson Career Campus day. So that keeps, again, from a cohort standpoint, keeps those students at a campus and not going from one place to another. One of the things around high school, we do have some courses that are singleton courses that students attend from across the district. Because those are typically one class period, we will not allow those to happen this year. We'll be looking at other ways students can take that content, perhaps online. At least we're starting that way in the fall. And our hope then is maybe by the spring semester that we would be able to remove that restriction. But currently, allowing kids to transport from one school to another during a day is not something that we're going to be able to do. Students who are, enrolled in our in-person, we're going to expect them to adhere to all of, the health guidelines and protocols and procedures that we have in place. Our bell schedules, for the most part, stay the same, with the exception of middle school. We need to move the middle school schedule to start 15 minutes later and get out 15 minutes later as well. And that's due to transportation needing to clean the buses between dropping elementary students off before picking up middle school students to take them to class. And Todd will talk a little bit more about that. The other option that is available to our families is a fully online option. And this is using the courses will be taught using online curriculum that's been developed by national curriculum developers, and they'll be taught and then monitored by Thompson School District teachers. And we'll be recording attendance regularly and that'll be based on attendance with the teacher when those in-person time, and when I say in-person, when they'll be meeting virtually in a synchronous manner with their students. So that would be one way to take attendance. There'll also be attendance based on how students are moving through the digital content that's provided, and then also for the assignments that are submitted. We're asking that once families declare that they want this online option versus being in person, that they are declaring for a full semester. So at the elementary and middle school level. At the high school, because of the uniqueness of that 4x4 schedule, students are not likely to be able to compact their learning in the online manner. And so we would be asking that students in grades 9 through 12, that if they are going to go with this fully online version, that they would be doing that for the full year, to make sure that they have the credits that they are going to need in full course content. We're also, the content that we'll be purchasing for K-5 is through Florida Virtual Schools. It's delivered through an online portal that is their online portal. And there's definitely opportunities for students to engage in the online content, but then there are also hands-on activities that they will do that will help limit some of that screen time. We're anticipating that students will still spend 4 to 5 hours per day in learning activities. Most of that time will be in that online and offline activities that are provided by the vendor, but students will be checking in regularly with their teachers through whole group instruction. There'll be small group, teacher might pull together a small number of students in the class for individual support. And that will all be scheduled through the teachers and then communicated to the families on what that schedule is, once school gets started. We'll be training our teachers who will be assigned to the online. There will be extensive training through Florida Virtual Schools on how to use the platform, what's in it. Teachers will have the opportunity to customize they'll be able to add to what the content is there. So if there's something that they feel like the students need in addition to the content that's delivered asynchronously to the students, they will be able to do that. They'll be able to add add some additional lessons or some additional things for students to review, look at. They can add some assignments as well. For the secondary students, we'll be delivering the content through Fuel Education. This is the provider that we currently use for Thompson Online. And students will be, for the most part, it's asynchronously delivered. They'll be scheduled into classes, much as they, similar classes as they would have been enrolled in person. And so middle school students will have their 4 core content areas, content courses, as well as electives that are typical in our schools. And then high school students will enroll in courses that will meet their requirements for graduation. District staff, our teachers, again, will be trained in how to deliver this. One of the things that is also available from a professional development standpoint from Florida Virtual Schools is a separate module that is not specific to Florida Virtual School content, but how to deliver effective online, how to be an effective online teacher in this kind of modality. So we will be purchasing that PD module for all of our teachers who are going to be delivering this online instruction in this fully online module method. So, whether they're teaching the K-5 Fuel Florida Virtual or the 612 Fuel Ed, will be having that professional development available as well. Our special programs, as we look at this, our students who are English language learners and gifted and talented students, as I mentioned before, this will be delivered in person. We're looking at how to deliver, especially the English language development, to students in that if they are part of that fully online. So we're still reviewing exactly how we're going to do that, but we're required by law to do that. Our students who are on 504 or students who are on individualized education plans, we will need to review all of those plans to ensure, especially students who are on an IEP, to ensure that if the family chooses the fully online, that is going to be, that we're going to have to review and hold IEP meetings to ensure that that is an appropriate placement. As in our plan, we've got a lot of specifics that you've had a chance to look at about how we're going to serve our students safely, and so we're certainly looking at and ensuring that we've got appropriate personal protective equipment and minimizing again how many different adults interact with students and how many different adults interact with as well. As far as athletics goes, we're going to be guided by the Colorado High School Activities Association. So we're still waiting guidance from them as to what fall sports looks like. We already know that the Colorado Bandmasters has canceled fall marching band season. And so we're looking at, practices and protocols in those particularly high risk, choir and band. There's a lot of movement of air by students in order to do those. So we're really looking at what we need to do to be safe there. We'll be minimizing the shared tools and resources with students, and and assemblies and field trips, probably not going to happen right away, and that will be, obviously based on when we can get students in there. Just want to talk real quickly about PD in general. So the 4 extra days that are going to be, they're available to us through CARES Act. Our staff will be, our licensed staff in particular will be going through training on not only what is the health and safety needs of being in person, but also good instructional practices that are that transcend whether we are in person, whether we're delivering content remotely, or we're doing kind of this flex in and flex out. So staff will have, they'll kind of be, I will call it days, the mornings we're anticipating are going to be, or planning for, are going to be kind of those building days of how do we just organize and set up our school, our setting, and then the afternoon being more in an asynchronous learning model about what is the, what's the difference in content, how am I going to deliver this, knowing, the parameters of now what my classroom's going to look like, whether that's my remote classroom or my in-person classroom. And then the rest of what has been typically a TENS week will be, there's a half a day for additional district time. There's an additional equivalent of a full day of building time to have, more of those conversations. And then there's a day and a half of just that teacher personalized time. The 2 weeks that are then now what are the delayed start, we're not sure exactly what we're still, now that you've approved that, we need to build that out. But we believe there will still be some need for buildings to come together to talk about how they're going to plan and prep. But the majority of the time will be for teachers to be utilized for them to plan their lessons for both in person and building out what their remote classrooms would look like. Gives more time for those who are going to be assigned the full online to be able to really get to know that online platform and really start to look at what are those lessons so that they can be prepared and be able to deliver that well. I will just say the last thing then from a super high level overview is that, from a social emotional learning perspective, we are using some of the CARES dollars to be able to hire social emotional learning specialists who will be deployed to schools and be available for each building to be able to help support the teachers, the counselors, the principals, other personnel on addressing the social emotional behavioral needs that are going to be evidenced when students start to come back to school. And we're also then using CARES Act dollars to support, it's partly social emotional, but it's partly academic, is to support some after school opportunities for students to have extended days. And so, those won't start right away with the start of school, but we will get those kicked off, after a couple of weeks of school, so that schools can plan what that's going to look like. And again, that's all contingent on being able to have staff, students back in the building. So I'm going to turn this over to Todd to give kind of that high level overview of the physical and structural safety aspects of the plan.
Thanks, Don, and good morning, everyone. Yes, what I'd like to touch on first is, as Dr. Schaefer mentioned, information is changing daily. But one confirmation we did get yesterday is CDE did issue guidance along with CDPHE, the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. They held a webinar to define more guidance for school districts. The encouraging part of that, as we were going into that meeting, I was had a little bit of angst and worry about their guidelines and where we were at. But what I will say is our guidelines align with the recommendations that CDE and CDPHE issued yesterday. So there was nothing there that really changed the guidance at the state level to the local level and then to us. So that was good to hear. We had some verification of items to do, but in general, our plan that has been that will be published will be aligned with those guidelines. So in moving forward, hitting some of the highlights of the plan, the face coverings is one item that was talked about both at the state level, local level. So within our plan, we are requiring face masks 100% of the time when on school campus. There will be options, and we'll have to work through the details of mask breaks. So as we talk about that, when you're inside the classroom, when you're inside the buildings, the face mask will need to be on. But within the plan and when talking to the county, there's break time. So what does that look like? That's really outdoors, and how do you really separate, have fresh air, but then also get a break from your mask, which also aligns with delivery of some of the content. Is the recommendation or thought is to put some of the push a lot of the classrooms outdoors. When you're outdoors, obviously there's a temperature issue that we'd have to think about, but when you're outdoors, then you have more flexibility with how you can actually space, you can rearrange more, and then what you can do with masks. The other item that confirmed our plan yesterday that was the conversation about social distancing and physical distancing, and what is that magic number. So CDE did come out yesterday and said that social distancing is still in place. That's 6 feet, but they did recommend and said that it was okay when you're inside of a classroom that 3 feet is appropriate and still keeps the risk of the spread down. So they did confirm that what our county was saying and what is within our plan is that we can push have the kids in the rooms, but just make sure they're as apart as possible. And they recommended a 3 foot student to student spacing. So that was good to hear because there was a lot of questions within the classrooms saying, if we do decrease this, what does that mean? And can we do that? So at a state level, they did come out yesterday and say that is appropriate within the classrooms to take that down to 3 feet if needed.
So Todd, real quick, was that 3 feet regardless of a mask policy or with a mask policy in place?
With a mask policy. Basically how we have to think about it is each one of these safety precautions is additive. So when you have a mask on, that reduces the risk a little bit. When you separate the chairs, that reduces the risk a little bit. So each one of these precautions in place, really when you add all them up, that's where you minimize most of the risk. So if you were to just do the desk and without the mask, it increased the risk, because there's still that extra layer of protection without the mask isn't there. But when you put the different layers of these safety precautions in, that's what really takes the risk and starts lowering the risk of the spread down. A few other things I'd like to touch on is, as Don mentioned, the cohorts and contact tracing. So they did also confirm yesterday that cohorting is particularly important when you look at keeping kids in school. So it will be down to a county level as far as what cohort either shutdown or risk analysis will look like. So when I say that, if there was a case with the parent, with a student, with a staff member, we will follow the county's guidance for what we do with that particular cohort. So, for example, if a student or staff was within a cohort, the county actually takes and works through that cohort to tell us what we need to do. Typically, it would be, that cohort would be shut down, they'd go online, then we'd recover, we'd clean the building, then we'd go, shut down for a certain amount of time, depending on the risk of spread, and then put students and staff back in the building or section of the building. But that's important to note because, it's important to note because the cohort then is really the, one of the hinge points behind these plans to keep as most students as we can in school without shutting down schools. So the bigger the cohorts, as you can imagine, the larger the shutdown in the school would be. Some other things we're doing, just in preparation and to be proactive, is we're using ASHRAE guidelines for air quality. So when I say that, that's the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning, and they provide national guidelines of what air exchanges should be. So I say that because there's a lot of questions of, wearing masks, our classrooms feel hot, what are the air exchanges or is there fresh air? So we're physically making changes in the classroom to increase that air exchange to meet these guidelines. But it's also worth noting that just because there's airflow doesn't mean it's cold air. So we're not putting in air conditioning. What it is basically just taking the fresh air from outside and we're changing some physical structure within the building to then rotate that air through the classrooms to create more fresh air. Daily through the building, we've got additional equipment ordered through CARES Act for restrooms. So there'll be multiple times a day we'll disinfect the restrooms. That's one of the areas that when you look at guidance from CDC and CDPHE, that's really the focus area because that's where you get kids going, all the kids from the cohorts go to that one spot. So we have to be very mindful about how we disinfect the restrooms. And drinking fountains is another. Yeah, Paul.
Sorry to interrupt. You need to. I just want to go back to air circulation for a minute. So it's my understanding that classrooms tend to use fans and so forth because of the heat, but current recommendations or guidelines is that is not a healthy thing to do and we won't be using fans, or is that still an option to help with the heat?
So currently, what we've been discouraging the use of the fans, but because of the increased ventilation, I will say that we've just got to educate how we use them. Um, if they can be used to more circulate the air, to circulate the air out of the room, that's okay. But what we don't want to do is, cross the airflow between student to student to student. So if they're used properly, they can help the circulation. But if they're used in a way that you're pushing particles from one student just directly to another, that's what we want to avoid. A couple of things that I'd like to review is, so the daily disinfection. So the other thing we're doing is looking at putting bottle fill stations in some of the schools that don't have them. The drinking fountains will be shut down. That's by county direction. But for filling your water bottle, we're looking at putting bottle fill stations more throughout the district, so students can bring their own bottle and then fill up their own water bottles. Plexiglass shields. So there's a lot of conversation about when do we use plexiglass shields, when is appropriate. So we are going to install them at the entry points of the schools, at the front desks, where some of them are already protected with glass, the ones that need it. And then we're also looking at it to support our students with special needs, to provide more of a one-on-one, closer instruction environment. Additionally, we did purchase some new masks that just came out, and I don't know if you've seen them, but they are actually there's clear plastic in the center, so you can see their mouths, or see the teacher's actual mouth. So we did purchase some of those for the school as well. Speaking of that, when we talk about FF&E, or I'm sorry, PPE, personal protection equipment, we just got a shipment in of masks, so we're providing every teacher with 2 cloth masks. Surgical masks will be given to the schools to use for either staff or visitors. Someone has to come in to pick up their child. Face shields, so each teacher will also be provided those plastic face shields. And then there's gloves and gowns for our health clerks that they'll be working with the students if they do become sick throughout the day. The other piece you'll note maybe that I want to point out within the plan is we are not allowing volunteers on site as of right now. So this is something we hope, as if we can integrate the opening with the plan. This is one of those pieces that we need to get our plan down with our staff and students first, and then we can push into maybe allowing some volunteers on. For right now, we will not be allowing volunteers on site. Another piece I'd like to touch on is symptom and exposure guidelines. So what do we do if the staff and student does become infected? The county really is taking lead on that. So they're going to issue guidelines for us, a matrix of what they're going to do between exposure limits, exposure risks, areas of the buildings need to be closed, and then what we need to do to recover. So that'll be given to us by Larimer County Department of Health, and they're going to help guide us for what that would look like. As I mentioned before, we're not the experts in disease spread control, and we provide a lot of guidelines, but they're the ones that are really going to help us analyze the risks to our students and staff. So, for example, if there was say even within sports right now, if there's someone that comes up test positive, they will do that tracing tree to then identify if you're at risk. So there's a lot of questions and there's a lot of rumors that come out. Well, I heard this person, is tested positive. Do I need to quarantine? What I need to do? So for our staff is really working with HR to help identify that process. But then the county will also help us through that process too, because they're going to really do that tracing tree to identify who's really at risk with that contact. They can identify that better than we can, and it's really up to the county guiding us, and then they'll also work with Bill Siebers and his team in HR, so we can track that in an appropriate way. As far as classroom guidelines, we'll just touch on is we've talked a lot about what does it look like a classroom. We're going to be spreading our desks or tables to the furthest extent possible. So we are going to set up a Google form for all building leadership to identify what they need, either moved out or help shift around. That way we can know how to properly support the rooms and the shuffle of the rooms. The other thing I'll touch on, I won't go too much in the outdoor guidelines or the guidelines for in-person meetings. What I would like to touch on is transportation. That's the next piece that is changing as quick as everything else. So our current guidelines are written around 27-ish, give or take a few, depending on the bus size, students per bus. So that means one student per bench. So right now what that does to our transportation is without having to do a double loop, because if we were to do a double loop at elementary, it pushes all the schedules back too far out in the day to where we can't have the schedule we currently have. But to keep that single loop, there are routes at about 16 buildings that will have to limit the ridership per bus. So we'll have to work with the principals and work through the process of, okay, if there's only 27 on this bus, how do we work through a process to identify who's best fit for that seat? So distance will play a role. The other piece that I want to share is we did a transportation survey to all the eligible riders. We got over, I think, right about 2,000 responses back, which is a pretty good chunk of responses. And it came back to about 20% of the eligible riders would not do transportation. So they're saying, regardless if you provide transportation or not, 20% of them are already saying we're not going to do that. So our hope is that with, there's already decreased ridership. There's decrease. There'll be some students that are going online that we're going to ride the bus. Is we need to fine tune exactly, who's could be at risk for not getting that transportation service. So that's something to work through with building leadership. And I will say that our hope is that we can change, these guidelines will change, even as of today, but to allow increased ridership on the buses. So that is something we're currently pursuing with the county, is to see if we can increase these numbers to then provide more service for our students. I will pause there because I know there's probably a lot of questions. The only thing I would like to mention on the nutrition service side is even if you're online or in school, there even online students have the option to pick up grab and go food service. So I think that's important to note for our community. And then school security, just to touch on that, that will look a little different. The drills, protocols will change a little bit, but we are providing and putting together training videos for students in more of a virtual way. So I will pause there, and Mark wants to jump in.
Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Schaefer.
Oh, thank you. And I know, so we're going to transition in a moment to Board of Education questions, comments, feedback. The other thing I just want to point out for you as well as our community, we recognize that as we continue to provide information, it will continue to generate questions. Some of it is more high-level questions. Some of it is pretty specific, granular level questions, but all questions are very, very important. And as a district, we're committed to answering these questions. We're hoping that when we release, following board support, when we release this plan this Thursday, July 23rd, that may answer some questions. We are planning an online community forum on July 30th. So that's next week, which in real time we will answer questions of the community as they may come forward as well. As we get questions and as we're answering them, we're also populating the answers to these questions on our website under frequently asked questions, FAQ. And so there is starting to be a running list of frequently asked questions and then answers. And what Mike Hausman is doing is beginning to categorize the types of questions so that they'll be easily able to be found and located. And then finally, we're asking each school in our school district to hold a community forum as well, online, virtual. We know that parents will have very specific questions for schools. And so each school, prior to the start of the school year, and hopefully within the next 2 or 3 weeks, will begin to have these online virtual forums as well to be able to answer questions. So we know there are a lot of questions. We are, there's a balance between providing information and then being able to answer questions. We know that it's important that we answer questions. We are working hard to be responsive. We are trying to balance our responsiveness with accurate information. So we want to make sure that when we provide information, it's true and accurate and up to date. But please know that there is a commitment on the part of our district to be completely transparent, to share exactly what we're doing, and then also be responsive to questions. So I just wanted to share that with the board as well as community.
Thanks, Dr. Schaefer. Okay, I know you all have a bunch of questions. So let's sort of take this. You guys all have a copy of this plan, right? The written plan. So I think if we just go through it sort of section by section, with the first section being the academic section. I don't think, unless anybody has any questions on the welcome letter, the return to learn, the overview, that kind of thing, I'm guessing maybe not. Is there anything on that sort of that introductory part?
Lori, I do have 2 questions there.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, the first one is something I think we might be able to address in the collaboration section, which is right at the very beginning. As I looked through the various parts of the introduction, I didn't see any mention at all of the Board of Education in regard to collaboration, in regard to any of our input or feedback, etc. I think it's important that that's part of it. We are the community's representatives. We have had probably more opportunity for input and questions than anybody else. So I guess I said I had a question. I don't have a question. I'll just make that a statement. I would like to see some reference to the Board of Education and our part in the development of this plan. The second one is, I'm curious, and I'm not quite sure where this belongs. I'm curious as to why the high school in-person model isn't considered a hybrid and called a hybrid. I believe the language says the options are full in-person and full remote. And it seems to me that when kids are in class in the morning and taking their 2 classes, and then they have remote later on in the week, that's a hybrid. So that's a question for you. Why isn't this considered a hybrid?
Stu, that's a great question. We haven't called it a hybrid because most districts, when they're calling it a hybrid, is truly that hybrid, meaning that we're putting kids are more remote than they are in person, and that they're not there every day. We're calling this full in person because students are in class on campus every single day, versus other school districts that they're looking at, students are only there, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then they're remote Tuesday, Thursday, or whatever that might be. So we're not seeing it as that level of hybrid. So that's our rationale, is that because kids are there every day, it is still fully in person, even though there's remote learning occurring.
That makes sense to me. Thanks, Dawn.
That it, Stu?
Let's see, I have one more that's on question that's on page 1 that regards breakfast and lunch. It's near the bottom of page 1, and it says that although cafeterias will be closed, items will be available to eat outside or in the classrooms. That's not true for high school students, is it? Don't they have to do grab and go?
That is true. High school students will need to, they may take the lunch from their high school and then go home to be ready for remote learning. So yeah, we certainly can clarify that.
I think that's I think that's a good idea to clarify that. Lori,
What about-
that's all I.
Thanks, Stu. I was gonna just follow up on that. What about breakfast though for high school? Do they have breakfast? I mean, I don't even know if they have breakfast at high school.
Maybe Gordon can hop in on that one.
I believe they do have, I'm sorry, Madam President, Dr. Schaefer, members of the board, Gordon Jones, Chief Financial Officer. Yes, high schools do have breakfast available as well. That's something we would look at to be more of that grab and go and be consumed in the classroom, which is what takes place at some level right now. Some teachers permit that in their classrooms. We would look to extend that model to have that available. Again, with the understanding no meals should be consumed in the cafeteria from a congregant seating standpoint, but could be consumed in the classroom. And typically those are more of I'll say a modified grab and go basis anyway. So that's how I would anticipate that being, but we'll coordinate that plan with building administration at each location.
So Don, you can amend that to put grab and go in there. And I don't know that you want to specify the different levels. I mean, that's up to you guys, but make it broad enough to cover that. Dr. Schaefer, yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing I would just point out, it says this in the high level summary as well as later on in the document on page 15. Meal service will also be available for our online students as well. So we recognize that about 15% or so, we'll be doing online learning, but we will make meal service available for them. But protocols will be established, so they won't be entering the building. We'll have kind of an outdoor, I think, pickup or something of that matter. So we're still developing that, but I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, and it references that in that very first as well. It calls out the online students. Okay. Go ahead, Pam. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to get in line. So first of all, to verify, students can do both Thompson Career Campus and their home high school. Because because it talks about, I think on like page 5, like, they can't access the classes at the other high schools, but they can do TCC and their high school.
So that is correct. So they would be, TCC would be one of their days because that would be like periods 1 and 2. And then the next day they would be taking periods 3 and 4 at their high school or whatever, the flip. If TCC happened to be periods 3 and 4, it'd be
awesome. Awesome. And then courses like, let's say AP Calculus BC, are those one of the courses you're looking at doing all online, since a lot of times the kids had to travel to to just one high school from the various high schools?
That's where we're still exploring with teachers how to best deliver that so that students from other high schools can take it. And so does it make more sense, can it be done where students are in the classroom at the home high school and we are able to televise, for lack of a better word, but be able to have students stay even at their home high school and still access the content during the same time.
So that's kind of to be determined.
Yes.
But that was one of those classes that kind of popped into my mind as a class that they always have traveled for in the past. Another quick question. So if a student opts to do full-time online, how much time will they actually spend, generally speaking, with a Thompson School District teacher if they're doing full online?
So it will somewhat depend. At the elementary level, they'll be spending more time with the teacher, in part because the class sizes will be a little bit smaller and the needs are different for elementary students than what it typically looks like. There's 4 to 5 at elementary, 4 to 5 days or 4 to 5 hours in learning. Probably, what we've seen as maybe a recommendation is like on Monday, maybe it's a 90, 30, 60 minutes, just kind of check in to make sure that everything, students know what they're doing, where they're going. And then the actual like whole group, small group would then occur on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And so it'd be, anywhere from 30 to 90 minutes, maybe up to 2 hours a day, depending on the schedule. So over the course of a week, probably, what I would anticipate, again, it will be kind of how the teacher schedule this, but I'm anticipating it would be at least 5 to 8 hours of that over the course of the week, knowing that it's about 25 hours, 20 to 25 hours of time. So most of it is in that asynchronous mode. At the secondary level, it will look a little bit different. But there'll be regular check-ins with teachers on where they are in the content, what supports do they need with the content. It's a little more independently driven at the secondary level.
I think that's a concern that we really need to be aware of, that, Thompson School District, even if the kids are doing that full-time remote online, that Thompson School District is still there, that's their school. Okay, final quick question. So how are we handling teachers who, are they putting in requests if they only want to do let's say the remote online? I'm just curious how we're dealing with the licensed staff right now, and how that assignment is going to play out. And maybe that's a Bill Siebers question. I don't know.
It is a Bill Siebers question.
Everybody, that's a great question. Madam President, School Board, Dr. Schaefer, Bill Siebers, Chief Human Resources Officer. Yeah, that's a great question. Right now, we send out information to staff about, if you fall into a vulnerable population or there's apprehension returning due to the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. We are looking at accommodations right now. We have up to 50 accommodations that people have put in for. So what we'll do is we'll look at the accommodation and see, what we can do and what we would put in place. So if, as far as the online curriculum being taught, we're trying to find out how many teachers we'll need and what reassignments we'll need to do. If we reassign staff into that role, of course, they need to have the qualifications for it and the teaching license, of course, which they do. That's kind of our next steps of what we're looking at. Does that answer it?
Yes, thank you very much. I know that's just been really a big question out there of how the staffing is going to work out. Thank you so much. That's all.
Thanks. Anybody else on the academic portion? Dawn, and then we'll go back to Stu. Dawn Kirk.
Okay. I'm trying to group them together for Dawn and then Todd because there's some that overlap. So forgive me if I don't get that perfect. But there are a handful of things I have about academics. And I do first want to say that you guys have managed to do to really plan for every contingency. And now we're starting to get into that very detailed planning. And so also, I understand that many of these things we haven't planned for yet. I just want to get the questions out there, even if we don't have a plan. So a couple of things strike me when I look at the fact that we're looking at maybe 10 to 15% of our students choosing to be online only at the beginning. And some things that strike me from the spring. One is, I know that we are working to do devices for every student, but that's a plan that's going to take several months, depending on which school a child's in or student's in. But another thing that was a big challenge was someone might have a device, but not internet. They might not have reliable email. They may not have other tools. So one of the things I think would be very helpful specifically would be like an FAQ around what supports we're going to be providing both in school and outside of school with tools. We talked about masks for teachers. I think that lots of people want to know what those resources will look like. And honestly, I understand that we needed everything yesterday, but this to me seems like an important piece of the puzzle for parents to be making a choice. That's kind of a challenge too. We're working through so much of this at 90 miles an hour. But at the same time, we're asking parents to make that decision for a year or a semester. And some of these things may be what helps decide it. Because I'm hearing that a lot with what's happening with athletics being one of the drivers. Another question I'd like to to have answered soon is just talking about the vetting of our online curriculum. So I understand we've got a new tool, as well as continuing to use one that we've already had. So it would be really nice to understand what went into that. Knowing that last year when we looked at new curriculum, we went through that several times. Obviously this year is going to be different. So I'd like to understand that better. I know that we are not yet planned for all of our special groups, but as a parent of children who meet those needs or have those needs, I really do need to understand what is going to be different for some of these target groups. And I know that we're talking about how we can do that very differently. I would like to get into the details of that as soon as we can. Another one that strikes me that we've been talking about as almost, and I understand why, but we've been really focused on the core classes, but I know many students are really driven by that passion. So the arts, the music, the choir, the athletics, the PE, the activities. And what I would like to praise is that we've seen some really great examples inside of TSD from the spring and the summer of groups that, in 2 of our graduations, we had groups that sang, and they weren't together, but they did a beautiful job coming together. So I'm wondering, how we'd like to encourage and empower and support that kind of work, because it's going to take some creativity to get a drama production together, but it is feasible. And that I saw some great work by Miss Q at Bill Reed in the spring with that kind of thing. So, finding those ways to bring that in, because that, honestly, there were some days that it was only because of that curriculum that I could get my student to engage with anything else. And then sharing the best practices is always a challenge for us. But, how do we make these things scalable? And how do we ensure that when we figure out a good way to do something like this, it's shared across grade levels, schools, online and in class, so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel and have that pressure on the individuals. And then another big thing that strikes me is the idea that one of the biggest challenges that people had with social distancing in the spring and summer, and a lot of pushback we're seeing right now, is because we feel like there's a lack of connections, the social, the relationships. And that's not to say that we cannot do those things well when we don't see each other face to face. And so I would like to see some thought around that, not as an extra, but as a critical component. Because I know that some people are thinking, well, if my kid's not going to be part of the 5th grade class that they've always been part of, I'm not sure what to do. I've heard those kinds of challenges. So it would be really helpful to know, how are we going to create some of those? And honestly, we're going to have those challenges in classrooms as well, because we're losing some of those traditional ways that we allowed for that. And then equity, of course, is kind of a big umbrella under all of this. And it's very granular, but I'd like to understand how we're reaching out to some of our communities since we know that there are some people who don't have internet or reliable email. How are they engaged with these surveys? How would they participate in the forum? And I'm actually going to ask for 2 extremes. I hope that we can make everything or close to everything available virtually, so that the teachers who are teaching in a virtual environment can connect with a meeting that we have or training that we have, as well as I want to make sure that we have the non-technical solutions that we can repeatedly do to reach the people who we may be missing right now. I'm especially worried about our homeless populations, especially as that's changing and people are maybe struggling with that in a new way as this goes on. There's also, I've noticed several questions online from people who are saying, where is this in Spanish? So how are we reaching some of our multilingual families? And then I continue to worry about that with everything I've already asked about. as that extra umbrella, as how are we making sure that some of our most impacted families really have the support from us? And I'm going to say something that's just a little philosophical, but this is another example of something that it really impacts everyone coming back to school to solve in a way that businesses have struggled to solve it, families have struggled to solve it. And I applaud the work that's went into doing that so far, because we are talking about being able to do something that a lot of school districts aren't doing, or won't even take on as a challenge. And so I really appreciate that. But at the same time, I want to make sure that our community is also supporting us as this moves forward. And I know that's going to be hard at each individual family level, but we've got to think about community solutions for this. Transportation is another thing that hit me, with the equity of that, the equity of offering lunches and breakfasts, but you have to come to that. I'd love to understand a little bit more about how that's worked in the spring and summer, to know, what about, because it strikes me that if people are food insecure, they're probably transportation challenged as well. There's probably a good overlap there. And that's something that I feel like isn't necessarily a school district challenge, but it's fell to us to solve it with the help of some of our groups. Another big question I heard over and over again that I would really love to be able to access is, what are the health department guidelines for these scenarios? We've heard a lot of questions around what if this and what if that. So since the health department's the one who's going to make that decision, it'd be really helpful, I think, for our families to know what to expect as the year goes on. So if the health department has something like that, it might be helpful for us to link to that. Yeah, that's everything. Oh, and another question from yesterday that I thought was really important was clarifying for our families what they need to do for home screenings and contract tracing, and how they can be prepared when there are questions of closing schools or closing cohorts and that kind of thing.
Thanks, Dawn.
So I can address a few of these, Madam President. How would you like me to
hang on just one second, because we're up on a break. If you can you do it quickly, Dawn? And then we'll get Barb and then Stu on the way back. Because what I don't want to do is I don't want to leave it hanging and go on a break and then forget the answers. But I need to take a break. So go ahead, Dawn, and then I'll get.
All right. So Dawn, we will definitely get some FAQ around the device and how are we going to support families with the reliable internet and tools. So we'll do that. The vetting of the online curriculum process for K-5. I took a look at a number of different vendors that have online. Looked at their reputability, looked at how they delivered the content, looked at, did they address the standards? Price was obviously also a consideration. The type of professional development they provide was also key. So that's how, it was vetted, was to identify what was in what's best model. And I would say that Florida Virtual came out on top on all levels of user friendliness, both from a student and a staff perspective, from price point, from professional development. So, we've got a contract with them for a year, and then, Fuel Ed we already had. And so that was kind of a no-brainer. And we've actually already paid for the licenses for for what we anticipate being the district usage. So there was no reason in looking beyond that. As far as special, students, special populations, in particular students on an IEP, Charlie is going to be Charlie Carter, our Executive Director of Student Support Services, is going to send out much more detailed information to our educators and our paraprofessionals about what does, more than what's in the plan, is how is this really going to work. She will also be communicating with families so that they also are in the know about what the process and what's going to happen. And she's already been responding to a lot of questions from families about what does this mean? What is it, if I choose in person, what does that look like? How's that going to impact my students? You're absolutely right about elective and activities. We know that, especially at the secondary level and even to a degree at the elementary level, that's what keeps kids in school. And so, our teachers will continue to look at, especially for the in-person, is how do we do that? How do we do them safely? There are ways to do choir and band without everyone being, expelling air at the same time. So it's, figuring those out. And when we need to go virtual, is they did an awesome job this past year of making that happen. And to kind of go to your scalability is just that, is we learned a lot in the spring about when we had to go remote, and so part of what the professional development will be in those first 4 days is exactly that. What were the best and most effective practices? What were the tools that worked well in remote and in person? I mean, in person teachers have. I mean, they know how to do that, and they can modify for a environment that looks a little bit different when they're in person. It's really replicating those effective practices moving forward. Relationships are key, and that's really in part what we, that shortened week, or not the shortened week, but the shortened day, that first week it's about protocols, but it's really about relationships. And it's, that's what I'm most excited about, is to be able to get kids back with their classmates and with their full class versus only half of their class, to be able to bring them back full class with their classroom teacher to so that they can learn who's in the room, what are their talents, what are their interests, so that when we do need to go remote for whatever length of time, then those can be built upon and they can be enhanced. And similarly, we learned a lot about what worked, the classes that worked best in remote worked best because of the relationships that were built early on. And even if, whatever degree we need to do with remote, part of the professional development that teachers will have when they come back is around that, is how even more important than it has ever been to build relationships and to have that engagement. I feel like I've had that opportunity to get to know some people, teachers, through our negotiations and our advisory committee beyond that, yes, it would have been enhanced had we been in person, but we were able to still build some, camaraderie and some, see into each other, see the person behind the relationship and the context of the meeting. Equity, so the survey message did go out in Spanish, and the survey is in Spanish, and families may respond in Spanish. So we do have responses coming back through that. Our staff, our coordinating staff, who are, work primarily with our, students, whether it be our building administrators and our district level staff, they're back on contract as of yesterday. So, we'll be continuing to do that outreach to our most vulnerable families. And so that now that we've got, people back, we can now deploy them again and get that outreach to them. Grab and go, that's, the thinking was it would be very similar to what we've been doing that, we did during the summer, that it might be a location, and Gordon could certainly speak more to this. We did do some transportation of food, to different stops. So, Gordon and his team will be looking at that, and that's a great consideration especially once we know who is online, who's chosen that online option, what makes sense for how we would distribute that food. So, the other items were specific to Todd, so we'll stop there.
Thanks, Don. Dr. Schaefer.
Yeah, I just wanted to extend on a few things that Don had just shared, and Don Kirk. Great questions. Thank you so much for asking them. The two things I want to just extend on, the Florida virtual selection. Not only did Don and her department vet it and evaluate it, I will note that many other school districts here in Colorado are also using the Florida virtual platform as well. So it is a tested, well-researched, well-grounded program that other districts have explored and have landed on as well. So, there's just know that many districts are using this model as well, and so we also found high level of utility and value in this program. Around equity, which is a huge, it's really, really important, something we don't want to lose sight in, especially now as we're providing lots of information, and we have, the access to information is variable, quite honestly, among our community and families and parents and students. So we will be translating everything from this document that we hope to push out on Thursday to our FAQ. As Dawn mentioned, we have translation individuals coming back, but we're going to also be making sure that everything is communicated in Spanish and is accessible. As I shared with you, we will have forums at each school, but we are talking about having Spanish-only forums as well. And so at each of the levels, elementary, middle, and high school. So certainly families will be able to participate at their quote unquote, participate at their home schools, but also Spanish-only forums just for accessibility will be super important. Being mindful of that need for individual reach out and communication. Will be working closely with our schools to make sure that at the grassroots level, at the ground level, there is a intentional outreach we can't assume that everyone has access to technology and internet, even though virtual is the way that we're trying to en masse deliver information. Sometimes it might be a phone call. Sometimes we may have to reach families that way on a more of an individual level to make sure that we are in communication. And so we will have a good example of this is, we push out a survey with online and virtual, and we've had a good return rate now, north of 5,000, but we have, just under 16,000 students in our district. And so schools will, on an individual basis, then reach out to each family to make sure that they have appropriately weighed in and have provided an option. We're not going to assume anything. And so for those that have communicated with us, great, check. But for those that haven't communicated, then we will outreach to them. And so hence good that we are building an additional runway, additional time at the beginning of the school year for that individual personal outreach. So just a little more information, but again, lots of other good questions.
Thanks. Todd, did you want to address some of the questions that Don had, or do you want to?
I can touch on them real quick. They shouldn't take but a minute. Yep. So, excuse me. So your question on the health department, that's really the matrix that they're going to put together for us. And so there will be a matrix that we are to get that's going to show the different level. One is it's going to tie to where they're at a county. So when we look at schools, it also ties to where the county's at. So it ties to their framework or their dashboard or where the county trend is. But then it will go into each individual school to say, okay, if this happens, here's what it could be, and this could be a two-day closure. If it's at this risk level, here's the recovery. Here's what we need to do to react from it, and this could be up to a week closure. And then there's always the red column that shows, oh, this is high risk. We're not in a good position, and then it goes into more depth about a larger closure than just doing a cohort or a section of a building. And Don, that's a great point on the home screening. We talk about that it needs to be done, and that's a big level of defense for our staff. So additional clarification and kind of the how-to we do need to provide. And after some discussion yesterday in our welcome back, it's thinking that a more pointed communication with our parents as far as how to towards the start of the school year, rather than putting it in a document of, okay, here's what is in the document of guidelines, a more pointed communication saying, okay, here's what is expected and here's how you do it, because there's resources out there that we can show. So I believe those are the couple there, Don, unless I missed something.
The only other thing was looking a little at transportation and equity. So we understand that we're still in the middle of making the transportation logistics. But it occurred to me yesterday how some of these challenges like the fact that we're not doing freshman and sophomore, that's a big change. So I know that we're going to have some more detailed questions about things like that, or any changes that we have to schedules and routes, as we get more detailed. So it's more of like, as we work through that, I think there's going to be a lot of families who are going to need to know those details. And I've heard several times now that we're still working on it. I just want to make sure that the public could hear that, that we're in the process, and we'll be sharing that as soon as we can.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Don. And it is important to note that there is an open registration process online now. And if it's not online, same thing. We're also going to work if the equity piece. So we are getting a lot of our registrations online, but we are going to take those. It closes on the 6th. We're going to take those and see what the gap is between what we get online compared to similar to the online, academic model. Is we'll then have to work with individual schools and say, okay, your ridership at this school, we only had 100 respond at 150. What's going on with these other 50 students that may need transportation? So that's the next level. But to provide the public with a hard answer is the 6th. That's when we're going to start that process to say, okay, here's where we know when our ridership is, and then we're going to take that next week, work with principals, and then define. We're going to make those calls and say, okay, who are we missing? One, and then how do we define truly who can ride the bus, and what is a fair process for that. My hope is, that provides the answer for where we're at today. I will say that it looks promising that we can increase our bus ridership. So my hope is to get that actually approved through the county, like soon. You don't have a timeline for that, but we are pushing that pretty hard because there is some surrounding counties that did allow 2 riders per bench. So if we can go to that, then our equity piece and the registration, it almost solves itself. So when I say almost, it depends on what our ridership is compared to. But my best hope is that we can get that pushed through, because when we look at it, we can make a process happen to fit 26 or 27 students on a bus, whatever it is. But how do we be fair with everyone and provide that equity? So that's the piece that really increasing the bus ridership is going to help us the most. And I don't say solve all the issues, but it will definitely help some of these questions that just came up. So.
Thanks, Todd and Don. Todd, I'm going to follow up on one of your answers, and then we are going to take a break and come back. You talked about the county having a matrix of, if this happens, if there's a positive case here or whatever, then here's the steps and the recovery plan. Is there a way for the community to see that, like to literally see if, one positive case turns up, then you close down for X number of days or whatever it is? Because a lot of people, it seems to me that a lot of people out there have that question, like what happens if a teacher tests positive? What happens if 2 kids test positive? And we can say that we've got a matrix that we're following, but I think if they could see that matrix, that would head off a lot of back and forth questioning.
Yeah, absolutely. And as soon as we get that final matrix, we will make it push it out with the county as well.
Okay.
They, the county was the information that came out last night between CDE and CDPHE. That was really a moment they were waiting for too, as we were, to say, okay, here's where we're at, here's where we have been, and the local control that we've assumed. That's what the direction was yesterday. It's going down to the local control of the county health. So they are also going to provide support for the district publicly, saying we're supportive of plans. And their plan was to get that matrix out so the public could see it.
That'd be great. I think that would save a lot of questions to them and to us, or to you guys, if we could see that. So, okay, what I'm going to do here is give us about 5 minutes and come back. And I know, Barb, you had a question, and so we'll go to you first when we come back. So 5 minutes, guys. Thanks. All right. Are we all back? Okay, looks like maybe we are. Thanks, Matt, for putting up the break sign, but it looks like we're all back. Appreciate it. So I'm going to go to Barb, if you remember your question. And then I think what I'm going to do is both Dr. Schaefer and I agree that we probably want to stick on this topic and push out the focus for the school year to maybe the next meeting. Although there are a few things that we'll probably have to quickly touch on before regarding next year's meetings and things. But as far as planning and in-depth stuff, we'll push that off. So Barb, I'll give you the question.
Okay. First of all, Don's questions covered a lot of what I was sort of wondering about, but I had another thought with wondering about the preschool situation. Since we have the pre-K district, what are we providing? Is that sort of Lamb's deal and he's going from there? That's the first part of that. And then will their schedule be adjusted as well? So that's one of my questions. The other one is the impact of the Florida virtual schools and the impact that's going to have on down the road. We have to be able to look at assessment and look at meeting the standards and those kinds of things. And so keeping that in mind as something to think about, that we have to make sure that that's a piece that we are addressing as well. And then on the transportation question is just a caution, because I know that we've offered the choice and a lot are choosing not to participate, but then does that mean they're going to neighborhood carpools? And if there's a neighborhood carpool, are there going to be sort of some guidelines, or is there any suggestion we offer in that aspect? Because I can picture where I live, that neighborhood out northeast of here, where the bus was 65 students on it last year. When I rode it that morning, we did our bus ride. And I'm thinking about, there were lots of big clumps of kids that got on. So if they do choose to put themselves into that situation, would there be some kind of a guideline or a recommendation, consistency provided for that? It wouldn't be, I know, our real responsibility, but it's a caution that will impact the school. So that's the other question. Then I kind of looked over the notes yesterday when I attended the leadership training and listened to some of the questions that they were asking. And I think that pretty much the questions that we've asked have addressed that. With one of the questions though was specifics that schools are going to have with how much flexibility they have for teachers to bring stuff in. Like I had a teacher call me last night and wanted to know if there was a possibility to hang plastic shower, clear plastic shower thing around to protect, to offer additional protection. And so I just wondered, it was kind of along the whole idea of the plexiglass, whatever piece. So that's just something that, are there going to be some guidelines set out so that we really have a little bit more understanding of that? I think those are the questions.
All right, well, I will take the first two. Preschool, we are also going to be offer in-person and a remote option. LAM is exploring what the online will look like. The current curriculum we have, Creative Curriculum, does have an online presence and platform, which they were able to use to some degree, for the last couple months. He's also exploring, there's some other other vendors. So he's also looking to see if there's, something else that might work a little more seamlessly, that could be truly the fully online versus, kind of what we've had with last year with the going from one to another. But he's going to try to make it work with Creative Curriculum if we can. From a scheduling standpoint, for the in-person, it will be the same as we've had. So the times for the full day will remain the same, the days and times. So they operate Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. Full day times being the same. and the morning and afternoon sessions being the same. So, the kids that are in person, that's what we're looking at doing. I know he does have to kind of look at balance of, his 3 different types of programs and how do we, and so he's got a Rubik's Cube to continue to work through there with what students are in and how does he balance those. As far as Florida Virtual School and the impact around assessment and standards, I mean, their curriculum does address and cover the Colorado standards. And so that we partly, when teachers are engaged in that, is to look at, and if there's something that is hit a little bit more strongly at a grade level from Colorado standards, is where do they supplement, put a few more things in. There are assessments for the content in it. I guess I look at this in some ways that, moving forward a year from now when, we go to do beginning of the year assessments, yes, it will be very interesting. We'll be able to track which students were in, we can tease that out and say these students were in the fully online, these students were in person, and then be able to just see what that impact is. And it's in many ways no different than when we have students move in from anywhere, is like we could be able to see is like, what level of preparation did they have coming into our schools and our settings. So hopefully that's what your questions were geared around, and if not, let me know and I can add more to it.
Well, I was also thinking that there's been sort of a district assessment guideline as far as how often they assess for literacy, how often they assess for math, those kinds of things. So I guess that was sort of a piece that I was asked about last night as well.
So, we took that time the last spring to kind of really reevaluate what district assessments we require and why. And so there's some changes there as well for our in-person. So, really why are we doing a district assessment? So that's already in the works, and the online will align well to that.
Thanks, Dawn. Before we go to, I think Todd maybe would answer Barb's question about the what flexibility about bringing things in. But before we go to that, I wanted to follow up Don Huckabee. Do we know from CDE about the state testing for next school year at all? Are they waiting till the last possible minute to let us know if anything's going to change there?
What we know right now is that they are going to offer PSAT and SAT to incoming juniors and seniors because they did not have the opportunity to take that last spring. That will be we do not know though yet what they will or will not do with state assessments this coming spring. And it may very well be that they start the year with the assumption that we're going to, and then at some point, depending on how the year progresses, make other decisions. At least that's what I anticipate at this point.
Thanks. Not surprising. Todd, do you want to address Barb's question on the outside stuff?
Yes, I believe there's 2 of them. The carpool, Barb, that is a good question. What we've talked about is asking, I mean, obviously it's hard to control, what neighborhood kids are going to carpool. But if they are, if we can get a list of who's riding together, because that will allow us to contact trace if within that carpool, a student was to go into another cohort. So it is a tough piece to control, and it's something we're going to need. But that's one piece we'll have to do to keep to keep that within compliance, is ask them to, okay, if you are doing this, can you provide names of who is being transported in that carpool? The second question was guidelines for teachers. That's a great question. And we will provide more. We're actually going to issue a Google form, with additional guidelines and supplies and what they need for preparation. We do have to be careful because sometimes, you think you can, like a shower curtain that might seem like it's safe, but also is it restricting airflow into where it's not the safest solution. So when we look at those types of pieces and you look at the data that's out there, the 2 lines of defense are what we're providing is the face shield and the face mask. I mean, that again, when you look at additive safety measures. When you add all these pieces up, that eliminates a lot of the risk. So that's why through the CARES Act, we provided both those pieces of PPE to staff. But yeah, that's a good point. Within those guidelines or that form, we'll send out some general guidelines to help guide some of those decision points.
Thanks, Todd. Does that answer your questions, Barb? Okay, I have a couple of my own, and then I'll go back to Stu. These are real quick, and I think that, and Mark, I see your hand too. These are Dawn questions, I think. So first of all, are we going to run I forget what we call it now, but the program that runs out of the church on Cleveland, or is that Lincoln? I guess Lincoln, for the homeschool enrichment program. It used to be called LEAP. I'm not sure what it's called now. So number one, are we going to run that this year? Number two, I had a question from a parent wondering if her high schooler could do in person, but pick up one of the online classes, because apparently some of the offerings are fairly interesting. So maybe pick up one. It sounded sort of more like an elective type kind of thing. I'm not really sure about that, through Thompson Online. And then the third question was, this is a little bit more complex, I think. Why are we not doing something similar in the middle school to what we're doing in high school with the 4x4? So those are all Dawn questions.
Okay, as far as, and it is LEAP, the program that is supportive of our students, we are planning to continue that. We just need to work with them, the program people around what does that look like, and how do they maintain their space in similar ways as our schools, so that it's safe for our homeschooling students to be there. At this point with high school, if they choose in person, they are choosing in person. We are not going to, and this would be actually for any level, is if you choose in person, it's in person. If you choose online, you choose online. We're not going to be having, students will be allowed to do some classes in person and then take some classes online through that online provider. So that's, that would be there. And then, great question about why we're not doing kind of this, you're in school for a part of the day and then go home and do some remote learning, why we're not doing it at the middle school and the high school, or middle school and the elementary. And really, from an instructional standpoint, having our elementary and middle school kids in school 100% of the time is what we feel is, is most appropriate for their development and their learning styles. We also look at there's the opportunity at high school, they're a little more independent to be able to go home and do that kind of work on their own when there may or may not be an adult in presence. So we really focused on having that elementary and middle school being in person so that they have the advantages of being able to be with their peers, being with their teachers, and having that instruction delivered in person to the greatest extent that we can.
Okay, thanks. That answers my questions. I think I saw Stu and then Mark Setter.
All right. I believe these are all Dawn questions. And Dawn, is it okay with you if I ask them one at a time rather than give you all of them at the same time, and then you can respond? My questions are short. I think your responses will be short. I was contacted yesterday by an AP teacher, and based on what she asked me, and I began to think about it, I'm curious as to how the AP structure is going to work for students whose AP class is taught first semester and the exam is offered at the end of the year. So
yeah, that's something we're still kind of working through, is exactly what does that look like, and if, to what degree can we load AP courses to only be offered in the spring. That's our first goal, is to get those to be offered in the spring. So then we don't have that concern. Those that we will have to load in the fall, whether that's then we do the course and then we offer some sort of review follow-up in the spring. We're still working through what those logistics are.
Okay. The second one is related to item number 7 on page 5, and you don't have that probably in front of you, so let me just read you that first part of the sentence. High school students will access courses available at their school or Thompson Career Campus, et cetera, et cetera. Should Front Range be in there as well? And how does Front Range figure into the plans?
So it's a great question. We're working with our concurrent enrollment opportunity, our Front Range aims. From what we're hearing, especially from Front Range, is they're looking at having reduced students on campus, and that they're looking at having their courses also be remote, and then with limited interactions at the schools. So we're, our students who have typically gone to Front Range on a campus select is, they'll still have that opportunity. It will mostly be done remotely, and then when they need to, and I'm just thinking about a welding class where they need to go and actually weld, then that's when they would go to campus. But otherwise, everything else is done in a remote fashion. Their instructors are determining, are they delivering the remote learning during when the class is scheduled, so in synchronous and everybody accesses it at the same time? Is it going to be, here's the content and you just do it and, you check in asynchronously and they have office hours, or are they going to do a mix? So we don't have all of that information back from them yet, but this schedule should work well and work fine for our students to continue to access those courses.
Okay. Will high schoolers in remote learning be able to take the same classes that they would have signed up for if they were in school?
So if they go to the full online, they'll be able to choose from the course catalog that's available. So to the degree to which those exact courses are, your traditional, language arts, math, science, social studies classes, those are all going to be there. There may be some nuances with electives in that online only options.
Okay. Then on page 10, it mentions, and somebody's alluded to this already, athletic programs, performing arts. I wondered how the district is approaching other competitive activities like Knowledge Bowl, robotics, activities like FFA, certain clubs and so on that are an important part of learning for a pretty sizable number of kids. So how do some of those, what I'll call maybe more non-traditional things, if we think of athletics and the performing arts as being the traditional, how are we going to address some of those others?
So it will be similar to what the guidance is for athletics, and maybe we need to change that to be more, athletics and, kind of those extracurricular kinds of things that are, your traditional and your non-traditional. Certainly going to continue to support them and do that in a manner that is, follows health and safety guidelines. Some of them maybe might be a remote, a meet like this where we are able to, connect. Some of the things like Knowledge Bowl, those do have competitions, so those will be guided by the developer, whoever organizes those competitions. Robotics, similarly. So we know that is a very valuable part of the learning experience for students, and so we're going to maintain them as best we possibly can in whatever circumstance we find ourselves, whether we can be in person or whether it's needs to be done virtually.
Will you refer to them in that same section so that when this goes out to the public, parents of students who are involved in those activities will also know what's going on? And this is my last question related to academics. And then when we go on to safety and security, I have a couple for Todd. What will instruction look like between August 31st and September 4th on those half days? Will it be just introductions to the school year, introductions to learning? I'm just kind of curious as to what the look and even the purpose is of those half days.
So it's going to look different by building. because each building has, different needs. It's, I think, it will be a typical first day of school. It's a shortened, especially those first 2 days would be a typical first day of school of going to meet your teacher, having that opportunity to, meet each other in the classroom, setting up the norms for the classroom. Elementary and middle school, and to some degree high school, is just how do you enter the building, because that's going to be big, is how do I enter the building safely, what are the processes and procedures going to be. As we get towards the end of the week, then it becomes more of the, what's the content look like, how do I turn in my assignments in person, where do they all go, how do I turn in my assignments if I'm online. So it's really around process protocols. There'll be, team building, that building those relationships. The structures are going to be, up to the schools and the teachers themselves. But those are the things that need to, that we anticipate and want to have accomplished, is that they've built relationships, that they've established and had students practice the protocols and the routines that are needed to be in person, as well as the protocols and routines that will be needed when online. Get into some instruction, but it's really about that. How do we be safe here in school, and how do we build that community of learners?
Okay, thank you. On to Mark Setter.
All right. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation so far. I feel like everybody's asked at least one of the questions I had on my list. So I'm down to about one, and I feel like we've already addressed it, but I just wanted to put it out there specifically. So with the ability to toggle directly to remote instruction, and with the shorter schedule, 2 weeks shortened, let's say that we have a natural disaster or a snow day. Is our expectation that we'll simply transition to online learning for that day?
Great question, Mark. Yes. Not great question, Mark, but question, comma, Mark. It is that, we will be able to deploy quickly, and able to just have instruction continue seamlessly. So that is definitely our intent.
Okay, that's the only question that was left on my list for the academics.
Thanks, Mark. Looks like Pam and then Dr. Schaefer. Or Dr. Schaefer, did you want to weigh in on snow days?
We won't have any snow days because we're able to do this virtually. Learning can continue on those days. But I wanted to extend a little bit on Don's answer around academics, and especially that first week back to school. While building routines and procedures and easing students back into the new realities and paradigms of safety and protocols will be important, we will want students to begin engaging in content and learning during that opening week. And so as developmentally appropriate, we will certainly begin that instructional piece during that first week. Part of our thinking is even during the opening 2 weeks where teachers are working, during a lot of that time and getting classrooms ready, getting, themselves set, we would be anticipating potentially staff reaching out to families as by way of introduction, forecasting, some of this opening of the school year. This may be done virtually, it may be done through a phone call, may be done asynchronous, but we would see maybe some of that preliminary outreach to students and families, certainly during that 2-week runway into the school year. But heading into that first week with half days, we do want to begin setting the stage for learning and then actually embarking on learning as well. And part of it is, as I talked about earlier, that professional development, quote unquote, for students as well. How do I access online protocols? What does that look like? What are the expectations around homework and attendance and those other pieces, so that a lot of those building blocks are built and scaffolded during that opening week of school as well. because again, there is a big shift. School looks a lot different. March 13th was our last functional day of in-person instruction here in the Thompson School District last year, and kids have been away that long. So upon return, the world of schooling looks different, but introducing them and beginning to build those routines and procedures will be important. So we will be intentional around teaching and learning even during that opening week of school, also knowing full well that we'll have to address the social emotional needs, the health and safety needs, those other pieces that will also be super critical during that opening week.
Thanks, Dr. Schaefer. Pam, did you have a question?
I do, probably for Todd. I'm just curious, when you mentioned the students could be 3 feet apart, I'm just wondering about that. Why not the 6 feet apart? And what are the chances if we have a lot of students deciding to go online more, full-time remote? Can we get closer to that 6 feet rather than the 3 feet you discussed?
Yeah, absolutely. So the 3 feet's more of a minimum. What I will say is on the call with, so two things. Let me answer kind of backwards from where you started. The goal is to maximize wherever we can. So in the document and even talking to building leadership, we're going to help them reorganize their rooms to maximize that distance as much as we can. That's the reason for maybe shifting rooms around, because even with reduction of enrollment because of online, there still may be some larger classrooms, and I say larger, that can shift to another spot in the building, so we can say get up to that 5-6 feet distance. So the goal is still to push the space as far as we can. On the call yesterday, the webinar with CDE, CDPHE, they had the state epidemiologist on, and they specifically talked about, okay, why 3 feet, why 6 feet? And what they were comfortable with coming out publicly is saying 3 feet is still a good risk reduction of social distancing. When you get closer to that is really when the particles are, I say, more abundant. So the epidemiologists did come out and support that 3 feet as a good risk reduction. Good risk reduction, even though it's away from that 6 feet. But with the reduction of enrollment from online, shifting around the schools, our goal still is to increase as much as we can, get as close as we can to that 6 feet. So that's why we're going through and we're taking, the flexible furniture out. Some of the things that were fun at one point, we are now going to have to take that out, and like the kidney tables and some of those items that at one time increased collaboration. Now we're going to have to remove those and really just isolate as far as we can the kids from one another.
Well, and I just want to say thank you to you and every staff member of the district, because this, I know we're stating the obvious for us, but this complexity of this situation, I don't think a lot of folks understand that every single little detail, whether it's a table in a classroom and how many thousands of classrooms do we have to deal with this. So thank you to you guys, because I know you're working constantly on making this safe and right for the staff and the students. So thanks.
Dawn Kirk.
Okay, so this is also talking about some of the safety pieces. So we talked about how we're approaching masks, and one of my questions is, how will we be, as we get more guidance and as we just make those decisions, I would like to understand how we're approaching enforcement of that. We did have the privilege of seeing a live graduation the other day, and we had so many great students and families who really did respect our requests. But we also know that the younger the kids are, or even the older the kids are, they have some variations on how everyone approaches mask wearing, and some even philosophy around mask wearing. So I'm wondering how we're going to be approaching that, in addition to the training to let kids know how to do it right, especially at the younger ages. How can families expect that that will be handled?
So a couple ways. One is we're viewing this no different than, if a student were to prop a door, or if you're um, disruptive in a way. It's a behavior issue that we have to um, almost put in a behavior matrix if you're not adhering to the guidelines. Where it gets a little tough is even, the recommendation is for kids under 10. They're actually recommended not, they're not in the guidelines for wearing a mask. So we're almost going to have to create a tiered section. If for this age group, it's a requirement and it's part of your day, and there's no wiggle room to not wear one, unless there's health reasons or other proven reasons from a doctor that we say, okay, this individual cannot. It's the younger grades that we're going to have to work with, because well, two things. One is it's not a requirement. When you look at CDE, it's recommended for kids under 10 years old. So because they are less susceptible to the spread and the virus, we're still requiring masks, but that is a piece that's coming out. I don't know, Don, if you want to talk more about the behavior and how we're going to address that. But, for us, it's really 100% of the time, it's just like propping a door. It's part of the culture. It's part of what we're going to do to protect our community and staff. And just like we wouldn't accept someone propping a door open or letting a strange visitor in, we're not going to accept people without a mask. That's just part of the reality we're moving to.
The only thing I would add is that, we're working with building leadership, both administration, and then when teachers come back, is how do we have a consistent district approach, and that this is not left to each building to determine and decide how it's, so that we have a consistent response. So we're working on that with building leadership first, and then we'll share that with building staff.
Thanks, Dawn. We are pushing up on 11 o'clock. I know we still have more questions, so I'm going to ask you guys what you think. Do you want to go on? You want to do another half an hour? You want to do another 15 minutes? What do you think?
How many more questions do we have?
Well, I suspect we have, I don't know for sure, but I suspect we have questions on safety as well as SEL. We haven't really talked about employees yet. There's an employee section, workforce section of this that we haven't really covered. So I'm guessing we easily would have another half an hour's worth of questions if we go another half an hour.
I'm good with it.
I would suggest we do it, because this is our chance. The district wants to put this out on Thursday, and we really won't have another chance to weigh in on it. So I'm going to just let us keep going. So good. So I have one quick question on that has to do with academics again, that I thought, of when we were talking, but then we'll continue on with safety and go on from there. But Dawn, what about parent-teacher conferences and back-to-school nights?
So right now we are planning for, because of the kind of where we are in July, and anticipating that August, we're still going to be probably under some restrictions to be able to bring large groups of people together. We are not planning on having an in-person back to school night. In part, the schools are going to do their school forum, and so that will be somewhat in lieu of. We're working with schools on how do we do that meet your teacher kind of thing, and again, probably virtual, in part because we're not only bringing kids to the school, we're bringing now their whole families. So it now becomes this very large group. So that's the plan there. Parent-teacher conferences are in October. So, we've got a little bit of time to see what the lay of the land is at that point. And, we'll make some determinations probably, mid-September, and get school up and running for a few weeks. And then we should have a better indication of what, early October might look like to make that determination.
Okay, thanks. All right, back to safety. Anybody have specific questions back on safety again? Okay, Stu.
Okay, Todd, I'd like to do it the same way that I just did with Dawn. If I ask the question and you give me the answer, and I think, again, my questions are pretty short, and hopefully your answers can be short as well, unless you feel the need to elaborate. Okay, my next question actually comes from a school secretary that I talked to yesterday, and she was asking the question on behalf of herself as well as the custodial staff. And it has to do with students going to the restroom. She said, or she asked, will kids be able to go to the restroom whenever they want to, since kids don't, just like adults, don't always have to go on schedule? And the reason she was asking is, she said, am I going to be spending a good share of my day calling the custodian to report to a restroom at a particular location in the building to clean it because a student left a classroom to go to the bathroom? So that's the question.
Yeah, thanks, Stu. So, no, not each individual timeline or each individual cleaning has to happen after each individual student. The recommendation from CDC and CDPHE is when there's a use of restrooms. So when there's, more than a few students. So if a class goes in and then there's another class scheduled to come in, during some breaks, then we would go in afterwards. But it won't be, it's similar to, you can imagine going out of a door. We're not going to clean every door handle each time each person touches it, but we will go into the restrooms in scheduled times to make sure we hit those high point times, those high volume times.
Okay, thanks. In classroom guidelines on page 14, and I think you've already touched on this, and I believe I know the answer to my question, and then I'll just say something quickly about it. Small group collaboration is not going to be allowed. Is that correct in classrooms?
That is correct, yes.
That has a big instructional implication. I suspect at the elementary level as well, but certainly at middle school and high school. And so teachers will need to be very clear that they're not going to be able to tell the kids to pull their desks together to work on something or to collaborate in lab classes or whatever, because that's a strong part of instruction anymore, is that collaborative piece. So I wanted to hear you say what you said, that no, it won't be allowed, and then to be able to elaborate and say it's important that the teachers know that. What will the safety protocols be for the 2 weeks that the teachers will be in and out of the building, but there won't be students?
So it'll be the guidelines where, similar to the meeting that, the welcome back yesterday, they're going to be required to check in, symptom check, and have their temperature checked. So it'll be the same guidelines starting now that will be the start of the school. So as they enter and exit the building, there'll be that process in place.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. Transportation questions. Will bus drivers be the ones who are responsible for ensuring that the rules are followed on the bus, or will there be other adults riding the bus as well?
So it will be the bus driver and the paraeducators that are on the bus. And that is some of the training on the CARES days. So we're actually training that staff on, behavior and how do you manage through these new times. So they will be responsible for that. And we are to elaborate a little more on bus safety. There's disinfecting between routes. We're also putting hand sanitizing stations as the kids get on. The state recommendation is we don't have to, but we are taking another step and putting those on. So, but it will be, to answer your questions, to the responsibility of the para and ultimately bus driver then to watch for that mask behavior, that safety behavior.
So every bus will have a para, or maybe currently has a para?
Not everyone, because it depends on the ridership and not everyone, but the ones that don't, it will be up to the bus driver still to manage those pieces.
All right. My last question for you, Todd, has to do with school security. Who will admit outsiders to the building when somebody comes to the door and buzzes? I'm assuming that the secretary, somebody in the office will vocally communicate, but who will admit an outsider? What are the protocols there?
Yeah, so it'll be similar to how it was before. The secretary will let them in. They will have to take their mask off and show their ID at the camera, because that's still one safety piece. We can't just, because we're in a situation with COVID, we can't forget all the other practices we have in place to keep everyone safe. So that piece will still be, that's still the ones that are accepted to come in. That will be the process for entry. And then once they get to the desk, they will have to do a similar check-in as name, reason for visit, your symptoms are okay, and then the temperature process as well.
All right. And then my last question is perhaps for Dawn, but maybe also for you. And it has to do with the public comment call at the beginning of our meeting. Will someone be responding to this parent? And I know you haven't had a chance probably to think about his suggestion, but what is the possibility of going with a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 1 week of having kids in school all day and then Tuesday and Thursday off, et cetera? And you don't need to respond to me in regard to that right now, but perhaps that's something new to think about. And I just want to make sure that the parent will be responded to.
Yes, we will make sure that we reach out to that parent.
Okay, thanks. I'm done. Thank you.
Thanks, Stu. Other questions on transportation, meals, outdoor, in-person meetings? Going once. Oh, Mark Setter and then Dr. Schaefer.
Yeah, probably a question for Todd Piccone. Todd, a couple questions about outdoor classrooms, and that we're encouraging that because that'll help slow the spread of COVID-19. So can you talk a little more about safety and security in particular in regards to the outdoor classrooms?
Yeah, so as part of the building plan, that'll be identified as that's how they're going to organize their day. So we'll know what classrooms will be kind of outside, obviously weather dependent. The other piece we have in place that I think the board is aware of, but if not, then we will be aware, is we have a campus monitor that's actually helping the elementary schools now. So they're actually going to roam the elementaries to help these specific areas of outside classroom visitor process. So that's a piece that started the end of last year, but then was going to be fully implemented this year, is a campus monitor that's specific just for elementaries to help oversee and monitor some of these activities that are going to be happening.
Okay, Dr. Schaefer.
Thanks. And I'm going to put Dawn and Todd on the spot right now. It's actually an extension to one of Stu's question, but a frequently asked question by our community has been early on in the late spring, early summer, we had offered the possibility of 3 options: fully in person, fully online, and hybrid. And ultimately, we landed on the fully in person and the 100% online. And the question that we've been asked within our community is, what happened to that hybrid model? Why did we go away from that? So this is both a Todd and Dawn question, but I know it's a frequently asked question.
Well, I'll start and then Todd can add too. So we landed with the 100% on in person versus the hybrid of having students, half the students in one day and then half the students the other day. In part because of the guidance that Todd mentioned, that we're able to bring students into that 3 feet with a mask. And from an instructional standpoint, we believe that having students there every day is more beneficial, not only for academic, but for their social emotional learning and being. And so that's why we've moved away from that hybrid, is to have students, have that contact with other students, with their teachers on a daily basis in person. And we're able to do that safely with the requirements of, if we can maintain at least that 3 feet. Todd, is there anything you want to add?
No, Don, I think you covered it, so I'm good.
Thanks. Did that cover it, Dr. Schaefer?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just provides the why or the rationale behind. Again, I think I would also say it's sustainability. Having 3 tracks, you can't have 100% in person and hybrid run concurrently. You can either do one or the other. So a choice was made to 100% in person. I think for many, a lot of the decisions were around health and safety and our guidance and work with the county to say that can be done in a safe manner, and just overall educational experience for our students. We're looking for more of a less of a disjointed, where you have 50% on and then 50% off, where this way you can bridge the entire class together to have that full experience, but still allowing parent choice. So again, for those that were not comfortable with the fully in person, we did offer that choice, that option for online.
Okay, thanks. Mark Setter, did you have anything further on this? Did I see your hand?
Dr. just covered it.
Okay. All right. Anything else on safety? Everything touches on safety, right? But security, social emotional learning support, questions around social emotional that we haven't covered. Dawn, Kirk.
So this is something I touched on, and again, I just like to see more detail around it. How will we be encouraging? So knowing that we won't have the collaboration in the classrooms, and knowing that we might not have a class that's all together for 5th grade, again, using that example, what are some of the ways that we can push that and use some of our social emotional supports? Because those little things really do add up as well. And then of course, obviously, we need I'm very grateful that we're going to have the support of social emotional for people coming back. And I really also just want to reiterate how important I think that those half-day schedules are going to be for those kids that really have strong feelings and thoughts and questions, to see how it goes as well. And for our staff, I imagine that's going to be critical. So that would be my one piece on social emotional.
So, and I just want to, I guess, make sure it's clear that, our students who are in the in-person environment, they will be in a cohort of, and I'm just going to use your 5th grade example. There will be, if it's a 3-round 5th grade, there will likely still be 3 5th grades. And so they will still have their cohort of students. Students from, let's just say Big T, who now there's 2 5th grade classrooms, but a portion of those 5th grade students who would normally be in person have chosen online. They are not part of the cohort of Big T. They will be placed with other 5th graders from across the district. So they will now become a new class. Yes, they'll be coming back to their school, the following year, but making that connection and staying connected to their peers at their home school, that is going to become a personal thing versus a district trying to figure out how do we do that. So we'll have that social emotional support both for students who are in the online only program and the students who are in person. So maintaining that, so teachers will be the first line of interaction, of how are engaging students and families, bringing them back, welcoming them back into whichever learning environment the student and family chose. From there, then it's our specialists, who not only our social emotional learning specialists, but our school psychologists, our school social workers, as needs are articulated from our teachers and behaviors that they see. Then we will go through a referral reference process to get the supports to the students and the families that they
All right, thanks. Barb Cruz.
I would just add also to this, with Dawn's conversation, both Dawn together having their conversation about collaboration, is that, we can remember that even within a classroom, collaboration can happen digitally. And so they can have those conversations that they can't have up close, perhaps, but they could have through, I assume Google Hangout has a place where they could do that. That's what I have to do with my students over at UNC, whether we're face-to-face or not, is we can't be in that close proximity, but we still collaborate. It's just a different form of that collaboration.
Agreed. And even within the classroom, to use, although the classroom's going to be filled different, it's going to, elementary and middle and high school classrooms are going to look different. There may be space, or there may be that opportunity to be able to go outside and then have them be apart, but still be able to do things collaboratively together in the presence of each other. They just may not be that shoulder to shoulder that they have been, previously.
Thanks. Let's move on to workforce management. Questions? Mark Setter.
So to achieve the social distancing, we've had some fairly large classes in the past. And so my question is, to achieve social distancing, are we expecting to see class sizes get smaller? Are we going to see an increase in the number of teachers to achieve that? Or what's our strategy across the district for managing that student to teacher ratio and achieving that social distance? And will there be a budgetary impact? If so, what's that budgetary impact? And are we comfortable with it?
Is that a...
So I take it the pause means, hey, Bill, you should answer this. Mark, thanks for the question. It's a great question. Currently right now, it gives schools an opportunity, principals to look at their class sizes. And it first starts off with the class size, meaning if you have a class size at 32 right now, and it's still in the same classroom, there needs to be a conversation of, okay, so can you shift that class to a different area within the school that could fit that amount? And then if not, is there some shifting around with schedules that can take place? So it's really, the schools making accommodations and principals working with their staff to figure out how to work with some of these plans and what that looks like. As far as additional staffing right now, we do not have it budgeted for additional staffing. We're just trying to see what it all looks like and what it trickles out. I think the additional staffing could come from, there's a question about substitute teachers helping us support. There's just so many unknowns that can hit the district where, like we had budgeted subs this dollar amount where we might need to increase that budget a little bit. So, there's things we're thinking about, but until we see the numbers and then we kind of see where the numbers are for online requests, how many students are going to be online. And then, when we work on the accommodations, what teachers are going to be shifted to teaching online? And then what does that support look like within the school if you're down a teacher that's reassigned into a different position? So those are all, it's almost like a huge puzzle. And then we're just trying to figure out what pieces we have to shift around. And sometimes we don't even know what puzzle we're putting together. So we have a lot of great ideas on what that could look like. And yes, it could impact the budget, but at this time, I couldn't make a prediction of what that impact would be because we just don't know.
Thanks, Dr. Siebers. Anybody else need to weigh in on that? Okay, anything else on workforce then? Seeing nothing, I'm going to move on to the final part, technology. Well, yeah, pretty much the final part, technology. Questions about technology? You guys, all right. I think we've covered them all. How about before and after school care? There's a little section on that. I think that's pretty cut and dry. Okay, excellent. Dawn, question or comment?
I just wanted to mention that our after school programs have been working. Boys and Girls Club has continued through the summer. That was something that some of us talked about over the weekend. And so for me, that was a great thing to hear, that they've been doing this since March or April and have been putting these things into practice. And so our partners are as dedicated to health and safety as we are, and in fact have been practicing some of the things that we're talking about doing so that these are more proven. Because I know that, you know, we're in a whole new situation every day. So trying to plan for that is always helpful to have some guidance from people who have actually put it in practice, to something that Dawn said earlier about how we might have to make adjustments as we learn what actually works with real students.
Yeah, thanks, Dawn. I think unless you have little kids, you don't realize that, Boys and Girls Club has been going on, and day camps, YMCA day camp kind of stuff. And I think even the rec center has been doing some of their day programs. I'm not sure, but yeah, it's kind of good to have that background. Okay, now I'm going to switch over here in a second, but so the final deal on this is you guys are going to make some changes based on what you heard today. Dr. Schaefer, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm going to first make a statement and then ask a question of the board. So my statement is, and it's similar to what I had entered in the preamble to this document, my letter to the community, that this is our current and best thinking now. And we know that the moment we push it out, the thinking may very well change, or we may have to, based on new guidance and new information. So it is a fluid document in that it will be responsive. We're not locked in. Again, these are based on as you heard Todd say, CDE, Colorado Department of Education, Larimer County Board of Health. We have run this plan by the county. They are supportive of our plan, but we are in weekly contact with them several times a week, and always checking in and making sure that what we're doing is safe and accurate. As you're watching the local and national news, you're aware of what's happening not only in our own community but throughout our country. Districts across the nation are really wrestling with what to do this fall. And some have made some determinations that they will launch virtually. Others are saying they're going to launch in person, and everything in between. And so we care about our community. And so while we're mindful of what's happening at the national level, we certainly are most interested in the Thompson School District community. That being said, and I've said it before and I'll just say it again, health and safety are our primary drivers. I know that there are concerns around, there's economic considerations that we hear from many members of our community. We're aware of that feedback, but health and safety and the science behind this ultimately guide our decisions. And we want to support our community and getting kids back in, and we want to certainly support our students. And we know that teaching and learning and all of that is absolutely critical, but health and safety is really going to be our primary motivator and driver. And so with that, just please know that we will continue to revisit this. And today is July 21st, and a couple days will be July 23rd when we push that out. And we'll be working on this up to the first day of school and beyond. What we're looking for today is, certainly we've been listening. You see a lot of our icons are turned off because people are busily taking notes and making changes and being responsive to board questions and requests. So we are committed to taking those suggestions and embedding them within the document and making sure that it's as clear as possible. But here's our question, our ask is that we're looking for an endorsement from the board to push this out in its current form right now. We are seeking board support around this document so that we can move forward with our planning. And so that would be my ask of this group.
Board, I'm not going to put this to a vote, but I guess I'm looking for a thumbs up or objection either way to this plan. So, sort of a thumbs up kind of thing to moving this plan forward. Great. Okay. Good deal. I think I saw everybody's thumbs. So Thank you on that. I'm going to switch over a little bit. Dr. Schaefer, remind me if I missed something, but I know we talked about we have to decide as a board what we want to do for our August meetings. So we have been meeting virtually, as everybody else has been meeting virtually. Our boardroom is a little bit discombobulated at this point, but I think should be ready for us to be able to go back to in-person meetings socially distanced in August. Now, there's a couple of concerns with that. Not so much from the standpoint of the board, because we can socially distance us with, you know, some on the dais, some on the floor, like we did before our last meeting in person in March, I guess that was before spring break. The concern is around public participation or even staff participation out in the audience. So if we keep socially distanced out there, Todd, I don't know if you can give me an answer to how many people we can fit in that room based on the square footage and a 6-foot distance. I'll put you on the spot a little bit. Do you have an idea how many people we could fit out there?
I do. So with Cabinet, Board of Education, Dr. Schaefer, we're going to take up probably 2/3, if not more, of the space. So there's not going to be much space for public. So the actual number I don't have for how many seats. I'll lay that out here in the next few days to get an idea of behind Cabinet, Board of Education, Dr. Schaefer, where that layout will be, what is left for staff, if any, or it's probably just, I would say, a row or two of anyone from the public, because that would be a true 6-foot radius there. So it's going to eat up a chunk of that. As I'm talking through it, since you put me in the spot, I'm okay with saying that there's probably only room, for staff, if staff were to be there, and probably not much room for public at all once we expand that room out.
Okay, so hang on a second, Dr. Schaefer. So what we could there's a variety of things that we could do. Is we could have people come in and out as they need to, staff as they need to present, that kind of thing. If they're not cabinet, if they don't need to be there the whole meeting, which people pretty much were doing anyway, right? The public could come in and out if they want to do public comment. We could continue to take public comment online, have us be in person. And there may be other hybrid versions of that. Dr. Schaefer, go ahead.
So I think the requirements, obviously, of a Board of Education meeting, other than having a quorum in order to do business. So we feel confident and comfortable that we'll be able to socially distance the Board of Education, as well as myself and Laura Lee, in terms of holding the meeting. But the two big requirements are that it has to be viewable by the public in real time. That is, that people have to be able to watch it. We can record it, but it still has to be viewed in real time. And there has to be an opportunity for public comment. So public comment, if we decided to do a sign-up protocol, we could certainly have individuals enter the boardroom and provide their public comment in person. The board, if it's so elected, could continue with the phone-in, where we play, we say, that the phone line will be open from, I'll just make up this time, 7 a.m. till 1 p.m. and that people can call in, and then we'll play it that way. So there's a number of decision points. I think the big decision point is August 5th is our next regularly scheduled board meeting, August 5th. And so the boardroom will be open and available and ready for our use. And so we are perfectly fine and comfortable, if it's the board so choosing, to begin meeting in person with all of our social distancing. As you heard Todd say, staff, frequently gives our updates and presentations. And so staff could certainly be in the audience, and we could probably socially distance staff as well. But now you're out of room for public. And so we would have to, get those logistics taken care of. We need board direction, though, because, again, we have a couple of weeks to get planned for the August 5th meeting.
What do you think, board? Who wants to weigh in? Stu.
So what safety protocols would be in place at the point that we meet in person? Would we be wearing our masks and trying to talk through our masks? Or we have our mask on, and then when we want to say something, we take our mask off, and then we put our mask back on. I'd be curious to know, and you may not be able to answer that yet, what the safety protocols are then for us as a very small group to be able to meet.
So I'll let Todd weigh in on that, but my thinking would be that, yeah, we absolutely would be required to wear masks during the meeting, and that when you were speaking, you would be able to remove the mask to speak into the microphone. As for those of you who attended our staff meeting yesterday in the auditorium, we were socially distanced and spread out. Everyone wore masks for the entire time, and that room was far bigger than our boardroom was. When individuals would come up and speak, then the mask would come off. Todd could provide guidance, because I could even see a scenario where the masks stay on the entire time, even when we're speaking. I mean, that may actually be what we do.
Todd, you want to
Yes.
weigh in, or there you go?
Well, yeah, I would just say a couple of things. One is we'll do the same process for coming in we would for any meeting. So sift and check, temperature check, sign in. So that would be a process for every meeting. When we're physically at our desk, I would recommend we just stay in the masks, 100% of the time. Again, each time you can leave it on, it's just it's a layer of safety that we can protect, ourselves and anyone else that may be in the audience. So within the plan, there is a plan, protocol for meetings and how they would be held. So we'd follow that, and then just add on to it, that we keep the mask on during the meeting.
I'll just weigh in and say that, other public bodies are meeting in person, and I've seen county meetings. I don't know about city council, but I've definitely seen county meetings in person and they do have public comment. In addition, we're asking our staff to meet in public, and we're asking them to come back in the buildings, and we're asking them to do their jobs. I certainly do not want to be the person who says, you have to do your job, I'm going to do mine differently. So I'm willing to push this a little bit to see, what we can do to have, I certainly don't want to have 100 members of the public sitting in the audience like we did before, but I think that we can safely do, certainly us and cabinet. I think we can safely do public comment if people, a combination of public comment where people can come in one at a time if they want to, or they can call in. I think we could continue to do that. So that's kind of my take on this. And I'll let anybody else who wants to weigh in. Dawn, looks like she has a hand up.
Yeah, so I would echo that same sentiment. I think that we really do need to move to in-person, given our commitment to doing that for our schools. With that said, one thing that I noticed over the weekend and yesterday was how often people were taking off their masks to speak. And I wondered if there was a reason for that with the audio visual equipment we had or something else. If that is not necessary to make the recordings work or the broadcast work, then I really would feel much better if we were as consistent with our mask rules as we're asking our students and teachers to be, as well as so we can continue to do our work, right? We don't want to have to be quarantined or anything else. We want to make it as safe as possible for each other. And I would like to be able to make sure that we can get the engagement, which is going to be the interesting thing for us to be trying, is how do we, my favorite part of the meeting is always the superintendent's report, and often that comes with visuals from the schools. And so I'm excited to see how we'll be doing that differently as we move forward and giving some great, I think that we should be examples of the creativity and adaptability that we're asking everyone else to do. And if we're uncomfortable with it, then, it's important that we're experiencing that and we work through that.
Thanks, Dawn. Anybody else? All right, so then do we want to go ahead and direct staff to go ahead and figure out how to make that happen in August? Yes, awesome. All right, sounds good. Always save the hard decisions for the end of the meeting when everybody wants to stand up and move away from the screen, right? Dr. Schaefer, yeah, go ahead.
Yep. So while I have everyone here, one thing while we're not going to, part of our thinking was to start laying out our plan for some study sessions and board work and development, and we can certainly push that to August. I would ask though, or I'd like to forecast for you what our thinking is for our August study session and see if there's board support around that, and if there's anything else that we could be working on, just knowing that we're trying to launch the year. So believe me, I'm not asking for more projects, but we do have some things that we would like to get in front of you sooner rather than later. In August, we'll certainly want to provide you with an update on the launch of the school year. By the time we meet at our study session, we'll be right there in terms of what that launch looks like. So we want to provide you an update with that. We want to bring forward to the board a discussion on our mascots. And so I'm just going to put that out there right now. And I want to tee that up in August if the board is okay for that. We're not going to do anything yet. We want to get in front of the board first in August and then look for board direction. But we want to take on the mascot question within our community, and I'll just leave it like that. But if the board is supportive, we can do that in August. Okay. And then I know I'm missing something else. I think, Don, there was one other thing that we wanted to do in August. Do you remember?
Those are the two biggies.
So then if that's then the case, then we can probably use the rest of our time then to set our agenda and focus for the rest of the year. So we could talk about fall launch, we could talk about mascot, and then we could talk about everything else, if that makes sense. Just kind of laying out the plan, if the board is supportive of that.
How's that sound? Don, go ahead, Don Huckabee.
Actually, I had to pull up I've got a spreadsheet of potential Board of Ed topics. The other one would be the possibility of continuing the conversation about student discipline. There was the one policy we wanted to kind of dig into there. That also could wait until your September study session.
Yep. Sounds good. I see head shakes. I think we're all on the same page. Just a touch base, since we've seen so much of each other over the last couple of days, we're not going to see each other again until next week, but I just wanted to bring to your attention on Monday, the 27th at 3 p.m., 3 to 4:30, there is a CASB webinar that you probably all were invited to. That's an update on reopening. If you weren't invited, go check out on CASB. I know I get the invitations. I've attended some in the past. I'm planning to attend. So if you didn't get an invitation and you're interested in doing that, check with CASB and get the meeting link for that. And then on the 29th, the Wednesday of that week at 4 p.m., there's a tour of the TCC and Ferguson, and looks like maybe the ECE Center scheduled. And I'm assuming we just meet, or we'll get further instructions, but I'm assuming we meet at probably at Ferguson TCC for that tour. Is that correct, Dr. Schaefer or Todd?
Yeah, that's correct. We'll do all three of those.
Okay. And we'll just meet at the site, at the TCC site. Okay, great. Anything else? Any other housekeeping? I'm going to be unreachable probably for the next, what's today? Tuesday. So Wednesday, Thursday, and part of Friday, we're going camping. So I don't know if I'll have service up there. So if you try to get a hold of me and I don't answer you, that's why. So other than that, I'll be back around on Friday. Okay. Seeing nothing further, I will adjourn us. Thank you so much. Appreciate the extra time this morning. Have a good rest of your week. See you.